shows that we're going, but I don't see it on YouTube. Does anybody else see it on YouTube yet?
Search on my phone here.
I'm on YouTube and it's not showing you yet.
Okay, on my end, it says end stream, and the live part is showing Andrea's countdown or ready to go with the timer.
Let's see.
Yeah, I'm getting it on YouTube.
You're getting it? You can see us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see my Dave's comment and my comment on the side?
Just a second.
In the chat?
Just a second.
Search on my phone here.
I'm on YouTube and it's not showing you yet.
Okay, on my end, it says end stream.
Yeah. 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 I see it.
Comment and my comment on the side?
Countdown or ready to go with the timer.
In the chat?
Just Dave.
There's a delay on the YouTube video.
Yeah.
What's going on? That's probably okay though. If we just start now, the delay will catch up and everybody will be able to see.
Yeah, I see 4 watching started.
So everybody else, mute.
There's a delay on the YouTube video.
You can bleep
But
up.
if everybody else mutes their mic, and then I'll do an intro, and then I'll throw it over to Jesse, and we can get her underway. Everybody will be able to see.
I see 4.
All right. Welcome to the UFHL Redraft. My name is Larry Fisher, and I'll be your host today. I'm the Director of Communications and Content for UFF Sports, and looking forward to hosting this 23-round snake draft featuring 12 of the 31 franchises from the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League. The 12 owners are ready to rock, and they will be selecting their 23-man active rosters while staying compliant with the NHL salary cap. Once we get going, you'll be able to see the timer counting down as well as the picks play out in real time. So without further ado, I'll put Jesse Gill on the clock, and he can lead us off with the first overall pick in the UFHL redraft.
Sounds good. Lots of good options at the top there. Just had to go with the best player available. It's obviously the one he wears the number on the back of his jersey, the year he was born. Plays for the Penguins, obviously. Number 87, Sidney Crosby. He'll be a happy member of the Flying Pylons. Putting Sean Cosgrove on the clock then.
Nice pick, Jesse. And next up will be Sean Cosgrove.
All right, thanks a lot. Owner GM of the New England Warriors, and with the second pick overall in the draft, we'd like to take Elias Pettersson.
Nice pick, Sean. Just waiting here to make sure it updates live so you guys can see the picks coming in.
I can't believe Pettersson didn't drop to 8.
That would have been ideal.
I was holding
So let's
out
see
hope.
here. All good on your end, Nathan?
Yeah, all is going good. You bet.
Okay. All right, and that takes us to third overall, John Kleinsasser.
I'll take number 17 there, Teravainen.
Teuvo Teravainen.
Yeah.
Nice pick. He's got a really good contract. That'll bode well for sure.
Yeah, hopefully.
And they're an up-and-coming team there in Carolina for sure. So next up at fourth overall will be Arlo Scholes.
Fourth overall pick is Steven Stamkos.
Nicely done. And his jersey number as his birth date or year that he's born, and obviously a captain of his team. Solid first overall pick in his draft year as well. So that takes us to fifth overall with Luc Grenier.
Yes, alors en français d'abord, on est très content d'être ici aujourd'hui. We're very proud to be here to select. And for this first pick ever in our franchise, at number 5, the MRA will select Braden Point.
Nicely done. Braden Point, obviously a guy who was a steal in his NHL draft year, but we got back-to-back Tampa Bay Lightning players there. Another guy who's got a really nice cap hit in the present. That'll take us to 6th overall with Charisse Schulz.
Hi, Larry. I am going to select Roman Josi.
First defenseman off the board. Nice pick. Nice way to anchor your franchise with arguably the top or likely the top defenseman available in our redraft. 7th overall, Hernan Salas.
I don't have a team name yet, so I'll just say Hernan selects, and I'll take with the 7th pick. I'll take Timo Meier from the San Jose Sharks.
Nicely done. I believe he has a really good cap hit as well, and a guy who certainly can score and impact a lot of different categories. Once his pick's registered, then we'll move along to 8th overall, Dean Millard.
Well, I'm really excited to be here and try to win another title with another team this year. And I'm a really big fan of this platform and Duckman's Dominators. Celebrating the EA Sports Championship. A few choices that I didn't think were going to be there for me at number 8. Making this decision a little bit tougher. But we are going to take Mika Zibanejad.
Nicely done. We got the first New York Ranger off the board goes to the reigning Corona Cup champions, who Dean, for those new GMs or new owners that are just joining us, Dean was the champion of our simulated playoffs. Just with COVID, we ran a EA Sports simulated playoff series just sort of for fun and to pass the time, and Dean's team prevailed there. And so despite that, he decided to enter the redraft because he didn't draft his original team, and here he is, and now he's got a new franchise player in Mika Zibanejad. Next up at 9th overall is Jeff McCarthy.
How's it going, guys? This is an exciting time for the Vengeance Hockey Club. A lot of picks that we, didn't think would be there, but we're proud to select from the Columbus Blue Jackets, Seth Jones.
Nicely done. A second defenseman goes, obviously a up-and-coming defenseman who has Norris potential in his future, and as the platform grows, you can't go wrong with a 25-year-old defenseman there, so that's another excellent pick. Next up at 10th overall is Cameron Turner.
So Cameron can't get into Jitsi, but he's making his picks on Telegram here, so we'll just monitor that for his pick.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. No rush. So yeah, as you guys can see, the player pool is removing the players as they're selected. So there's the remaining group by cap hit. Here's our rosters as we fill them as they go. So you'll see who. Charisse and Jeff will be updated momentarily. And yeah, and then that puts Cameron on the clock once we get his selection through the Telegram chat. And we won't time Cameron out this round just because he's having technical difficulties as far as getting logged into the Jitsi meeting. So hopefully he'll be selecting momentarily, and we'll give him an extra minute here if need be, hopefully.
Do you have Telegram going, Larry, so that you would?
I do. I just seen that the pick come in. Cameron Turner has selected from the Detroit Red Wings forward Tyler Bertuzzi. That puts Aaron Bell on the clock at 11th overall.
Good morning, guys. Before we take our selection here, I just want to pass off to my co-GM, Brandon Kowinski, for a few words.
Hello, everybody. We would like to thank the UFF for hosting this draft. Redraft Team 11 would like to draft Johnny Gaudreau.
Proud member of the Calgary Flames. Potentially, rumor has it he could be potentially traded this offseason. So an interesting situation to watch there after the playoffs. But current member of the Calgary Flames, Johnny Gaudreau. And welcome, Brandon. My apologies, we don't have your name in there as a co-owner, but we'll get you on there as soon as possible. And great to have you joining us. Next up at 12th overall, we have the co-ownership group of Jeff Brown and Brian Smith. They will have back-to-back picks to end our first round and start the second round. So Jeff Brown and Brian Smith take it away with selections 12 and 13.
Hi, all. Team No Name at this point in time would like to thank the UFHL and everyone here involved for their hospitality. With our first pick, we'll select John Gibson.
John Gibson, the first goaltender off the board from the Anaheim Ducks. Great cap hit, a team that should be on the rise. So certainly a guy that a lot of teams were looking at to be their goaltender, I'm sure. So nice selection there, and we'll throw it right back to you to start the second round with selection number 13.
In true Brian Burke fashion, Tom Wilson.
Get some truculence going for your franchise. That's another pick who, it's funny, a lot of people mocked that contract when Washington signed it, and it's looking like a really good deal now as he's become a real impact player and a guy who obviously contributes in a lot of categories for fantasy. So certainly a top line guy who's still only 26 years old with a bright future ahead of him. Next up, working our way back through the snake draft order in the second round at 14th overall will be Aaron Bell and Brandon Kocinski.
Before we make our pick, it's Brandon Kowinski. He wanted me to tell you that. We will select from the Vegas Golden Knights, Shea Theodore.
Shea Theodore, there we go. My apologies on the pronunciation, but yeah, Shea Theodore, obviously another, much like Seth Jones, young up-and-coming defenseman who can anchor your guys' blue line for a decade to come. So that's an excellent selection as well, which takes us back to Cameron Turner, which we'll queue up on the Telegram chat again since Cameron was unable to log on to the Jitsi conference. And guys, if and when you want me to adjust the screen to show you your roster, your cap hit, the remaining player pool, when it's your pick, just let me know what screen you want to see here if need be, and I will adjust accordingly if you prefer that, especially as we get into the later rounds and you need your cap space. I can show you that as well. As you can see here, it is updating for everybody. So if we go over to Jesse Gill, who took Sidney Crosby, you can see where he's at as far as the salary he has, what he has remaining, and what he needs to hit the cap floor. So if you need that screen, just let me know and I'll go back there. But for now, I'll stay on the commissioner copy redraft results. And I see we have our selection in for Cameron Turner at 15th overall. We have our second goaltender off the board from the Montreal Canadiens, Carey Price. That takes us to 16th overall with the Vengeance Hockey Club, Jeff McCarthy.
The Vengeance Hockey Club are proud to select from the Nashville Predators, Philip Forsberg.
Nicely done. You got a nice young core coming there with Seth Jones in the first round and Philip Forsberg in the second round. That's going to certainly bode well for the future of the Vengeance Hockey Club, which throws it back to Dean Millard and Duckman's Domination at 17th overall in the second round.
He's on mute.
Oh, Dean, you're on
Sorry.
mute. Sorry, bud.
We're taking Evgeny Malkin.
There you go. Finally, it's a finally pick. I'm surprised Evgeny Malkin lasted until 17th overall. Obviously, he's not as young as he used to be, but he's still very much an impact player. And I think this COVID break will have him very refreshed for the playoffs and ready to lead Duckman's Domination on potentially a good run again. So Mika Zibanejad and Evgeny Malkin, that's a nice start for the front line of Duckman's Domination, which takes us to Hernan Salas at 18th overall.
Yeah, I'll select from the Philadelphia Flyers, Sean Couturier.
Sean Couturier is off the board. We got I believe that's our first Philadelphia Flyer. I know we have a few of their forwards in the draft pool, but the first one off the board is Sean Couturier, obviously a two-way center who, again, is one of those guys who can impact a lot of categories in fantasy. That will take us to, once we register that pick, I will throw it back to Charisse Scholes at 19th overall in the second round.
Hi, Larry. I'm going to pick a forward for Mark Stone, please.
Mark Stone of the Vegas Golden Knights, formerly of the Brandon Wheat Kings in the Western Hockey League, and also the Ottawa Senators, guy who was kind of a late bloomer, but he's found a home in Vegas with his former junior GM, Kelly McCrimmon, and obviously a player who's got a lot of good miles left in him. That takes us to Luke Grenier at 20th overall.
Montreal won't lose a minute here, and we will select with our pick Artemi Panarin.
There we go, and that works well for the Red Army. You got a Russian there, and you got a guy who potentially could have been a top 5 pick in this draft. So it could be a steal at 20th overall. We'll see how that plays out, but certainly a nice start for yourself, getting Braden Point and Artemi Panarin with your first 2 picks, which throws it back to Arlo Scholes at 21st overall.
Tyson Barrie.
Tyson Barrie, former Kelowna Rocket, to be determined for his team next season. It'll be interesting because he's a defenseman he was an unrestricted free agent. He didn't have a great year in Toronto, maybe not the best fit there, but we all know he can put up big numbers as far as an offensive defenseman and certainly a power play guy. He's 28 years old, but Tyson has a lot of life left in him as a fantasy player. So that's a nice selection. Next up at 22nd overall is John Kleinsasser.
Could I get
player pool?
I got a question for you. They're not disappearing on my screen when they're getting picked.
You may not be in the commissioner copy. I sent that one out last night. If you check your email, there'll be an updated commissioner copy that should be showing you the live results of who picked and who was picked. And
I'll take Sergei Bobrovsky.
Okay, there we go. We got another goaltender off the board. We got 3 goalies down now. We got John Gibson, Carey Price, and Sergei Bobrovsky, who obviously signed a big contract in Florida. He's going to be a big part of the future for the Panthers. A guy who is a really good goaltender, certainly in the regular season. He's always had good numbers. Settled in a bit in Florida. It took him a while, but I think that pick is going to prove to be a good one down the road as he settles in more in Florida. At 23rd overall, Sean Cosgrove.
All right. Let me think here. Let me go with Peter Mrazek.
On another back-to-back goalies, Peter Mrazek of the Carolina Hurricanes is off the board. Obviously, a guy who started his career in Detroit and sort of almost nosedived there and then really had a resurrection with the Carolina Hurricanes and has been backstopping them. And certainly that's another team that's on the rise. That throws it back to Jesse Gill for consecutive picks at 24th overall and 25th overall to end the second round and start the third round. Jesse, if you want to take a break between your picks, that's fine. If you want to read them both, that's fine as well.
Yeah, no, I'll pick these two guys back to back. A couple guys from the Colorado Avalanche. Might as well keep the trend of goaltenders going and pick Philip Grubauer. And then with the 25th pick, I already have a forward. I might as well get a defenseman, so I'll pick Sam Girard from the Colorado Avalanche.
Nicely done. We're talking about teams on the rise. I don't think it gets any better than Colorado. So having their goaltender and having one of their top young defensemen who's certainly going to step in. Cale Makar probably being their number one power play guy, but Sam Girard he's got a lot more potential to contribute offensively, and I think we'll see that in the coming fantasy seasons. That takes us to 26th overall and back to Sean Cosgrove.
I need defenseman here. I'm going to select Ivan Provorov.
Ivan Provorov of the Philadelphia Flyers, another former Brandon Wheat King from his junior days, but certainly Provorov's a guy who I believe he had the most power play goals by a defenseman or right up there this year. So he's a guy that took on more of a power play role and had a big impact for the Philadelphia Flyers. That puts us back to John Kleinsaucer at 27th overall.
I'll take Shea Weber.
Shea Weber, speaking of big defensemen and impactful defensemen, the captain of the Montreal Canadiens, another former Kelowna Rocket who's been a winner throughout his career. Obviously, he's had some injuries of late, but certainly he had a great season this year. He's the leader. Him and Carey Price are the leaders in Montreal right now, and I think they'll be looking forward to possibly playing spoiler in the playoffs. A lot of people are hoping for Alexis Lafreniere in Montreal, but I don't think Carey Price and Shea Weber are thinking about Alexis Lafreniere. They're ready to go head-to-head with the Pittsburgh Penguins here in the play-in round. Next up, Arlo Scholz at 28th overall in the third round.
Elias Lindholm.
Arlo gets Elias Lindholm from the Calgary Flames, a guy who's really found a home in Calgary after that trade from Carolina, become a real impact player for the Flames, an offensive guy who, again, is one of those guys who quietly, I would say, puts up a lot of points and is a really good fantasy player. And as you see his contract come in there, that's a real nice cap hit at $4.85 million for the next 4 years for a guy who's probably a 60-plus point player. At 29th overall, we're back to Luc Grenier and the new MRA out in Montreal.
Yeah, MRA will go to the U.S. hockey pool to select Jack Hughes.
There we go, Jack Hughes. First overall pick in 2019. I'm personally surprised he lasted to 29th overall just because I think he was a little undersized in his rookie season, but he's got a lot of Patrick Kane in him. That's who I compared him to as a scout in his draft year, and I think we're going to see him. You've seen his brother Quinn Hughes have success in Vancouver this year, and I think with Lindy Ruff now coaching a more offensive style in New Jersey, I think we're going to see Jack Hughes' career take off sooner than later. That puts us back to Cherise Scholz at 30th overall in the third round.
Hi, Larry. I'm going to select forward Taylor Hall.
Nicely done. Taylor Hall, current Arizona Coyote, former New Jersey Devil and Edmonton Oiler. To be determined where Taylor Hall will play next season. He might be one of those guys that doesn't get a huge raise because of COVID and the flat salary cap. So it'll be interesting to see, A, where he lands, and B, what his next contract will be as far as cap hit goes. But Taylor Hall, another guy who can score, can shoot, and look back a couple of years, he was the league MVP. So getting a former Hart Trophy winner at 30th overall is another great selection there. That takes us to 31st overall with Hernan Salas.
I'll take with my third pick. I'll take from the Nashville Predators, Victor Arvidsson.
Nicely done. I know Victor Arvidsson has a really good contract, and I keep saying guys that impact a lot of different categories, but he's one of them as a guy that shoots lots, hits, scores some goals, and there you see his contract, 4 years at $4.25 million. So that's a nice contract to build around. At 32nd overall, Dean Millard and Duckman's Domination are back on the clock.
I just need 1 second here.
Yeah, no rush.
We're going to take Alex DeBrincat.
Alex DeBrincat of the Chicago Blackhawks, goal-scoring forward. To go with Dean's building quite the offensive powerhouse here. If you look at his roster, we got, where are we? Going over to Dean Millard. Dean's got Mika Zibanejad, Evgeny Malkin, and Alex DeBrincat. That's a nice starting three up front. So certainly he's doing well on the forwards. And next up at 33rd overall is Jeff McCarthy.
Well, I was going to take Alex DeBrincat, but I will settle with Claude Giroux.
It always reassures me that I made a good pick when the person says after me they were going to pick that guy.
Yeah, no doubt. And Claude Giroux, obviously another guy who could have been, first round pick in this draft. He's a pretty consistent fantasy player, a leader there in Philadelphia. So certainly a player that you get in the third round. You can't complain about getting Claude Giroux in any fantasy draft, even with a full player pool in the third round. Next up at 34th overall is Cameron Turner, who we will be relaying his pick in from Telegram. Cameron has selected Oliver Ekman-Larsson, captain of the Arizona Coyotes, their top defenseman, a guy who used to be maybe more of a fantasy player than he was the last couple seasons. But I think, again, a guy who's a captain and has a lot of pride in that jersey. I think he's got a resurgence in him as far as fantasy goes. I think another guy that this little break with COVID could be refreshing for Oliver Ekman-Larsson. And I think he's a guy that has 7 years, just signed that contract. So he's got 7 years left at $8.25 million, but I think he's got a lot of good miles left, both as a contributor to the team as well as to fantasy teams. So a nice pick there by Cameron Turner, which takes us to Aaron Bell at 35th overall.
We're happy to select Evgeny Kuznetsov.
And sorry, Brandon, I forgot to introduce you there again, but nice pick of Evgeny Kuznetsov, another a forward who's right in the prime of his career and has a lot of upside. So with that Washington team, they continue to be a perennial powerhouse, and Evgeny Kuznetsov's a big part of that. So that sets you guys up well with another strong forward. That'll take us to Jeff Brown and Brian Smith to close out the third round and start the fourth round.
Evander Kane.
With their first selection at 36th overall, Jeff and Brian have taken Evander Kane of the San Jose Sharks. Again, another guy who shoots lots, hits lots, and scores his share of goals. So nice selection there, and right back to you guys at 37th overall.
Josh Morrissey. Defenseman
Josh Morrissey of the Winnipeg Jets. Another one of those guys who I think is just only going to grow his fantasy potential, much like a guy like Seth Jones and some of the other young defensemen, Samuel Girard, some of those guys we've seen go a little earlier. Josh Morrissey has kind of become the number one or the go-to defenseman there in Winnipeg, stepped up with Dustin Byfuglien's situation. So good to see Josh Morrissey, another former Kelowna Rocket member of the 2015 championship team, is off to Jeff and Brian, which we're working our way back down the fourth round. So Aaron and Brandon are up at 38th overall.
Thanks, Larry. We'll take Robin Lehner.
We've got another goaltender off the board, Robin Lehner, currently of the Vegas Golden Knights. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Lehner contract-wise. He's been wanting a long-term deal and has never really got one in his career. And now with COVID, it'll be hard to find a way to get a team that'll give him a lot of term, but that could be good for a fantasy perspective. It keeps him motivated if he's got a short-term contract, and chances are he's not going to get the big contract that somebody like Sergei Bobrovsky got last summer. So he could be an affordable goaltender who's still mighty motivated to continue proving himself. That takes us back to Cameron Turner at 39th overall. And Cameron was quick on the draw. This time he's selecting Ryan Johansson from the Nashville Predators. Formerly of the Portland Winterhawks in his junior days, Columbus Blue Jackets when he came into the NHL. But Ryan Johansson, sort of the top line center, or 1A, 1B with Matt Duchene in Nashville, but certainly a guy who can put up some points for fantasy, which takes us to Jeff McCarthy at 40th overall in the 4th round.
The Vengeance are pleased to select Devin Dubnyk.
We've got another goaltender gone. We've got Devin Dubnyk of the Minnesota Wild going to the Vengeance Hockey Club. Played his junior in Kamloops and was a first-round pick for the Edmonton Oilers and kind of didn't quite pan out in Edmonton, but certainly has had a good, strong career in Minnesota. And a guy who has 1 year left on his contract at $4.33 million. So it'll be interesting to see where his career trends in the future, but certainly still a very viable number 1 goalie for a fantasy team, which takes us to 41st overall, and Dean Millard of Duckman's Domination.
Yeah, we're going to take from the defenseman factory, Dante Fabro of the Nashville Predators.
Good young top 4 defenseman from Nashville. A lot of upside there. Played his junior in Penticton with the BCHL Vs. Played sort of the Tier 2 junior there, but certainly was a top prospect first-round pick into the NHL and is continuing to grow. As you see, he's only 22 years old. He'll have a new contract after next season, so he's a player that's going to be very motivated going into a contract year, which is always something to keep in mind as well when it comes to fantasy drafts. That takes us to Hernan Salas at 42nd overall.
Now with my pick, I will take from the LA Kings, Jonathan Quick.
Jonathan Quick, another goaltender. So we're seeing a bit of a run of goalies here in the last to start the 4th round, but certainly a guy who has, I believe, 3 Stanley Cup rings and has been a go-to guy, one of the real faces of the franchise there in Los Angeles. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Jonathan Quick as well. He's got 3 seasons left at a pretty affordable $5.8 million, but he's had some injuries, and Los Angeles is a team that's certainly rebuilding, and it'll be interesting to see if he plays out that contract in Los Angeles or if he ends up on potentially another contending roster just because of his Stanley Cup experience. That takes us to 43rd overall and back to Sharice Schultz.
Hi, Larry. I would like to select Martin Jones.
Martin Jones, another goaltender, so definitely a run of goalies here in the 4th round. Good to get one while they're going, I guess, is the thought. But certainly Martin Jones, former Calgary Hitmans, where he played his junior, was a dominant junior player there. Has had an up and down career of late in San Jose, but again, a guy that I think can really rebound and still has some good hockey left in him. And certainly San Jose is a team that should continue to contend. They probably underachieved this season, as evidenced by where their draft pick is. Or I guess Ottawa Senators own their draft pick from the Erik Karlsson trade, but certainly a team that has a lot of veterans still. And Martin Jones would be a big part of that in goal with 4 years left on his contract at $5.75 million cap hit. That takes us to Luc Grenier and the new MRA in Montreal at 44th overall.
From the New Jersey Devils, the MRA will select Nico Hischier.
Nice pick, Luke. You got Nico Hischier, and if I'm not mistaken, you also have Jack Hughes. So you got back-to-back first overall selections there with Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier. That worked out quite well for the new MRA. You look at their team, and they're loaded up front. They got Braden Point, Artemi Panarin, Jack Hughes, and Nico Hischier. So to get or I guess there was a first overall pick in between Hughes and Hischier. I believe that was Rasmus Dahlin in 2018. But you got the 2017 and 2019 first overall picks in back-to-back rounds in the redraft. So congratulations there, Luke. And we're on to Arlo Scholes at 45th overall in the 4th round.
Oscar Klefbom.
Oscar Klefbom, the Edmonton Oilers' #1 defenseman, top power play guy there with the amount of firepower on that power play with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. You know Oscar Klefbom's going to get his points, and Oscar Klefbom has a nice contract as well, as we'll see here when he enters the system. He's a guy that's been an impact player for the Oilers and will continue to be going forward. He's got 3 more years left at $4.167 million. So that's a pretty cheap Oscar Klefbom as far as Arlo's cap hit and salary cap roster construction goes, but certainly a guy who's still a #1 defenseman and only 26 years old. So nice selection, Arlo. On to John Kleinsasser at 46th overall.
46, I'll take Max Pacioretty.
There we go. Matt Pacioretty, former captain of the Montreal Canadiens, now in Vegas, and another guy like Mark Stone who really seems to have found a home as a go-to guy in Vegas. He's always been able to score goals, and he's really revived that part of his game in Vegas. So a guy who's still only 31 years old, got a $7 million cap hit for 3 more seasons, but he had a resurgence this season, and certainly part of that veteran forward group in Vegas that is going to keep the Golden Knights a contender for the foreseeable future, which takes us to Sean Cosgrove at 47th overall in the 4th round. Sean, your mic may be muted.
Oh, sorry. We're gonna select from Carolina Noah Hannafin.
Or from Calgary.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, Calgary. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Formerly of Carolina, Noah Hannafin, but certainly a top 4 defenseman there in Calgary, and a guy who's going to have a bigger role in Calgary when you look at the way their roster's going forward. Both Travis Hamonic and TJ Brody are unrestricted free agents. So if they both move on, Noah Hannafin and obviously Mark Giordano is getting towards the end of his career. So a few more years left potentially, but Noah Hannafin's going to take on a bigger role there in Calgary, and a guy who has a very reasonable cap hit at $4.95 million for the next 4 seasons, only 23 years old. So a lot of potential to come in Noah Hannafin. That takes us to Jesse Gill at back-to-back picks to end the 4th round and start the 5th round at 48th and 49th overall.
I was going to get a forward and a defenseman, but I like these 2 young defensemen, so I'll just keep going that route. From the Arizona Coyotes, I'll select with the 48th pick, Jacob, I think it's Chychrun. I can't remember how you spell his last name, but how you say it, but pretty good up-and-coming defenseman there. And then from the New Jersey Devils, Damon Severson, a former Kelowna Rocket that Larry's probably pretty familiar with.
Yeah, definitely familiar with Damon Severson. A good Saskatchewan farm boy as well. Real good character kid. I think he's got again, I think New Jersey's a team with Lindy Ruff. I think that team's going to trend up as well. And I think Damon Severson's going to continue to make an impact fantasy-wise for the Devils. And for Jesse's franchise, Jacob Chychrun, much the same. He seems like he's been around a while already, but you see there he's only 22 years old with 5 more seasons left at $4.6 million. So 2 nice, affordable defensemen right in the prime of their career. So well done, Jesse. Next up at 50th overall, we're back to Sean Cosgrove.
All right, I'm going to select Blake Wheeler.
Blake Wheeler of the Winnipeg Jets. And surprising Wheeler lasted this long. He's another guy who's, he's been in that top 20 in league scoring multiple times in recent seasons, and he's a guy who was a bit of a late bloomer, and I think he's much like Mark Stone. I think Blake Wheeler's got some good hockey left in him, and I don't think the Winnipeg Jets are going anywhere anytime soon, and he's sort of the face of that franchise. So I think Blake Wheeler is going to be a solid player for the New England Whalers, the Warriors. The Warriors franchise that Sean Cosgrove will be unveiling soon. At 51st overall, we're back to John Kleinsasser in the 5th round.
I'll take Mike Hoffman.
Mike Hoffman, a guy who's currently in Florida. He's an unrestricted free agent, so it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. But a guy who, much like Max Pacioretty, all he does is score goals, and he shoots a ton, which, again, those shots add up in fantasy. So I think Mike Hoffman will serve you well, John. That's a nice selection. Arlo Scholes, we're back to you at 52nd overall in the 5th round.
Cam Atkinson.
Cam Atkinson of the Columbus Blue Jackets, who I believe had some injuries this season, but again, a guy who can really fill the net and put up a lot of points in fantasy, and a guy who is very underrated, I would say. And you look at his contract, $5.875 for 5 more seasons. He's 31 years old. He's kind of right in that same range with a Mike Hoffman, but kind of similar players there. But certainly Cam Atkinson, a nice selection as well, which takes us back out to Montreal in the new MRA with Luc Grenier.
From the Chicago Blackhawks, we'll select defenseman Adam Boqvist.
Nice pick, Luke. Luke has a nice young up-and-coming roster in the works here with Adam Boqvist joining the likes of Nico Hischier and Jack Hughes. That's a strong roster for the future, and Adam Boqvist is a guy who was a top 10 pick just a year or two ago, and a guy who has a ton of fantasy potential as an offensive defenseman. So nice choice there, Luke, which takes us to Charisse Scholes at 54th overall in the 5th round.
Hi, Larry. I'm going to select Mark Giordano.
There we go. Captain of the Calgary Flames. As I was saying, he's a guy who some people think he's towards the end of his career, but he's proven a lot of people wrong as far as the mileage in his tank. And again, a guy who's captain of that team and very much a prideful player. So I don't think he's got 2 years left on that contract, which will take him to 38 years old. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see him sign at least one more contract, likely in Calgary. So nice selection there with Mark Giordano as certainly a number 1 defenseman who still plays a lot of power play and a go-to guy. That takes us to 55th overall and Hernan Salas in the 5th round.
Yeah, I'll take from the Philadelphia Flyers defenseman Travis Sanheim.
I like that pick a lot. A guy I watched in junior with the Calgary Hitmen. I think he's just coming into his own in as far as being an NHL defenseman. You see 24 years old. He's another one you see there. He's entering a contract year, so he's going to have a lot to prove next season. So certainly a player to keep an eye on. And much like Ivan Provorov, I think that Philadelphia defense is only going to get stronger as they mature and certainly have more of an impact fantasy-wise. Dean Millard and Duckman's domination at 56th overall in the 5th round. Dean, you're on the clock.
I thought Hernan was going to take the player that I wanted right out from under my, just like he used to when we were on the air. But I am going to go with former Brandon Wheat King, Nolan Patrick.
There we go. Nolan Patrick, who obviously has had the migraine disorder and missed most of this season. But if he can get that under control and they can find the right meds to get Nolan Patrick's migraines to go away, he's still he was a dominant player in junior, 2nd overall pick behind Nico Hischier, and has sky is the limit potential with Nolan Patrick. Obviously, it's unfortunate he had sort of a lost season, but at 21 years old, he can certainly get back up to speed in a hurry and be an impact player, both for the Philadelphia Flyers and for Duckman's domination. That takes us to Jeff McCarthy at 57th overall in the 5th round.
Well, the Vengeance Hockey Club are very proud to select defenseman partner for Seth Jones, Matthias Ekholm.
There you go. Nice 1-2 punch on defense to get Matthias Ekholm of the Nashville Predators, a guy who's certainly a top 4 defenseman in the NHL. And with the categories we have in the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League in the UFHL, I think he's a guy that can certainly impact quite a few categories as a defenseman. And I do think there's potential for him to put up some more points offensively as well. So 2 years left at $3.75 million cap hit. That's a real nice contract to build around with Seth Jones on back in. That takes us to Cameron Turner in the Telegram chat. So we'll queue up Cameron. Cameron's ready to go. Cameron is selecting Matt Duchene of the Nashville Predators. So with back-to-back picks, Cameron, back-to-back rounds, he's taken that 1-2 punch from Nashville. He got Ryan Johansson last round and comes right back with Matt Duchene. So a good Nashville connection there for Cameron's franchise, which is based out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. So it's good to have Cameron in the fold, and good to see he'll have a lot of Nashville flavor up front on his team. That takes us to Aaron and Brandon at 59th overall in the 5th round.
Sorry, Larry, who was just taking?
Matt Duchene.
Okay, thanks. We'll take Brendan Gallagher.
Nice pick there. Brendan Gallagher, former Vancouver Giant in his junior days. Again, a guy who's a heart and soul part of that Montreal Canadiens core group. Between him, Price, and Weber, they're sort of the three guys that really make that franchise tick right now. So, and a guy who entering a contract year as well, you see there. So Brendan Gallagher will be mighty motivated to fill the net and get himself a nice long-term contract to set himself up for as many years as possible to come. That takes us to the end of the 5th round and the start of the 6th round with back-to-back picks, Jeff Brown and Brian Smith.
Oliver Bjorkstrand.
Oliver Bjorkstrand of the Columbus Blue Jackets, formerly of the Portland Winterhawks in his junior days. Obviously a guy who seemed to take a really big step this season. Columbus had guys like Matt Duchene and others, Artemi Panarin. They had a bit of a group of guys that left after last season, and Oliver Bjorkstrand was one of the guys who stepped up and certainly took on a scoring offensive role. So with a lot of potential to come as a 25-year-old. And right back to you guys at 61st overall.
Robert Thomas.
Robert Thomas of the St. Louis Blues. So those are two nice selections back-to-back for guys that are just entering the prime of their career. Robert Thomas, another young up-and-coming player in St. Louis who has a lot of potential fantasy-wise and will certainly trend towards kind of being a Ryan O'Reilly type guy, I think, there in St. Louis, a guy who can really impact the game both ways and be an all-around source of offense, but also a big source of character for the St. Louis Blues, which takes us right back to Aaron and Brandon at 62nd overall in the 6th round.
We were just about to take Robert Thomas, so we are on delay here. Just give me a second.
Yeah, no rush.
We'll take Dylan Strome. Thanks, Larry.
Yeah, you're welcome. Dylan Strome of the Chicago Blackhawks, former 3rd overall pick in his draft year in the Connor McDavid draft of 2015. He went just ahead of Mitch Marner that year. So Dylan Strome's a guy who, again, he's up for contract this offseason, which will be in October, November, strangely, but he'll renew there, and a guy who will want to take a step forward in his career offensively, certainly, and I'm guessing he'll probably get a relatively cheap bridge deal, if not an average salary long-term deal. So he should be a very nice player to add as far as cap hit goes going forward, and certainly a guy who has a lot to prove offensively, being a 3rd overall pick, but has all the skill in the world to achieve higher numbers. That takes us to, and he'll be on a line likely with Alex DeBrincat, who they played together in Erie in the OHL and juniors. So they got a good connection going there in Chicago, and I think Dylan Strome's a guy who can certainly take some steps in the years to come. That's back to Cameron Turner, and he has selected Calgary Flames defenseman Rasmus Andersson, a guy who's a top 4 defenseman for Calgary. And again, with Calgary losing guys like Brody and Hamonic, potentially you're going to see Rasmus Andersson really rise to potentially a top pair or certainly a good 3-4 defenseman for Calgary. and a guy who's got a real nice contract for 6 more seasons at $4.55 million. So I think Rasmus Andersson's stock is on the rise, and he'll be a nice defenseman there for Cameron Turner. That takes us to 64th overall in the 6th round, Jeff McCarthy of the Vengeance Hockey Club.
Vengeance Hockey Club are proud to select from the Boston Bruins, Charlie Coyle.
Charlie Coyle, a Boston boy as well. He's from the Boston area. He's happy to be a Bruin, and he fits in well with that Bruins team and the Bruins culture. I think he's got it. Yeah, he's got that fresh 6-year contract. But again, being from Boston, I think he'll definitely play his best for his hometown team. So that's a nice selection there, which takes us back to Dean Millard and Duckman's Domination. And Dean maybe I think Dean's back now, but he had to grab a phone.
I'm back now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good to go, Dean. You're on the clock at 65th overall.
We're going to take goaltender Antti Raanta.
Antti Raanta of the Arizona Coyotes. And it's been a while since we had a goaltender go. We had a big run of them there, and then it kind of dropped off. But Antti Raanta goes in the 6th round to the Duckman's Domination, and a goaltender who, again, entering a contract year. So he'll have a lot to prove. Arizona is a team that people keep expecting to take a step, and Antti Raanta staying healthy and pushing Darcy Kemper in a 1-2 tandem there is going to be a big part of where Arizona goes in the future. And certainly I think Antti Raanta, depending how that plays out with him and Darcy Kemper next season, he could end up being a #1 goalie somewhere else as well. So nice selection to get that goaltender for Duckman's Domination, which takes us to Hernan Salas at 66th overall in the 6th round.
Yeah, I'll take from the Los Angeles Kings, Adrian Kempe.
Adrian Kempe, a nice young forward from Los Angeles, a guy who was a 1st-round pick, and I think he's going to emerge as a bit of a leader, or a bit of a, especially with such a young team with Los Angeles. I think Adrian Kempe, I seen him take a step this season, and I think he has potential to take another big step, and I think that team is just going to have more and more offensive skill and firepower, and I think Adrian Kempe is going to find himself a nice role in Los Angeles and become certainly more of a fantasy player in the years to come. He's got 2 more seasons left at $2 million cap hit, only 23 years old, so I think Adrian Kempe is a guy we're going to be talking about quite a bit more in the years to come. That takes us to Charisse Schultz at 67th overall in the 6th round.
Hi, Larry. I'm going to select forward David Perron.
David Perron of the St. Louis Blues. He keeps ending up back in St. Louis, David Perron, and he's really found a home there. He's left a couple times, and he finds his way back. Obviously, a big part of the Stanley Cup championship team last season, and a guy who's got 2 years left at $4 million. And really a guy who I think is underrated in fantasy a lot of the times. He sometimes flies under the radar and yet manages to put up a good point total year after year, and he's a fun player to watch. He's got a lot of skill. That takes us back to Luc Grenier in Montreal at 68th overall in the 6th round.
Once again, from Russia, Montreal will select Nikita Gusev.
Nikita Gusev, you got the New Jersey Devil connection there. You got Gusev, you got Nico Hischier and Jack Hughes. So expecting Lindy Ruff is expected to really give that team a jolt offensively with those players leading the way. And so Luke's built himself, I believe that's his 2nd Russian because he's got Artemi Panarin as well, but he's certainly got a good forward group going for the new MRA in Montreal. On to Arlo Schultz at 69th overall in the 6th round.
Nicholas Backstrom.
Nicholas Backstrom is still on the board from the Washington Capitals. That's interesting that he lasted that long. I know he signed a long-term deal at a pretty healthy cap hit, but Nicholas Backstrom, Alex Ovechkin, I don't think they're done by any means. 32 years old only, so he's got some good hockey left in him. 5 seasons remaining on his new contract, $9.2 million cap hit. But certainly Nicholas Backstrom's a guy who perennially is in the top 10, top 20 in league scoring. So to get him in the 6th round could potentially be a big steal for Arlo's franchise. We're up to 70th overall, and John Kleinsasser in the 6th round.
We'll take Andre Kasha.
Andre Kasha, formerly of the Anaheim Ducks, currently of the Boston Bruins, and it'll be interesting to see how he fits in Boston, because he's a guy that everybody thought was underrated and under the radar in Anaheim and just never quite had his big breakout season, but he's got a ton of skill, and I think Boston with David Pastrnak and some of those guys, I think that could be a good spot for Andre Kasha to really break out in next season as well, potentially in the playoffs to come, and he'll be entering a contract year next year too, so a guy who will want to cash in and have a big season next year. So nice pick there for the Bandits and John Kleinsasser, which takes us back to Sean Cosgrove at pick 71 in the 6th round.
All right, the Warriors select with this pick Anders Lee from Islanders.
Anders Lee, one of the go-to goal scorers for the Islanders. Certainly they retained their core there. They had bunch of guys were up for free agency last summer, and they re-signed most of them. And Anders Lee, certainly the leader there, and a guy who scores a lot of goals, shoots a lot, hits a lot. He impacts a lot of categories in fantasy. So nice selection, Sean, which takes us to Jesse Gill for back-to-back selections to close out the 6th round and start the 7th round at 72nd and 73rd overall. Jesse, you're back on the clock.
Take a quick second to look at these again. God, I don't like my forward options again, so I might even just go with 2 defensemen again. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pick from the New Jersey Devils, Will Butcher, and from the St. Louis Blues, Vince Dunn.
There you go. You got quite the defense coming along. I know you had Jacob Chychrun and Damon Severson with your last back-to-back picks, and now you've come right back with Will Butcher. And your second selection, my brain just skipped. Who do you got there?
Philip Grubauer.
Sorry, your second defenseman that you just took.
Oh, second defenseman. Yeah, I got Gerard, Chychrun, Severson, Butcher, Dunn.
Right, Vince Dunn in St. Louis, nicely done there. So a guy who, again, has both those guys, Butcher and Dunn, are guys that continue to trend up fantasy. They're both mid-20s, right in the prime of their career. So you got a good defense corps coming along for the Flying Pylons, which takes us back to the Warriors, back to Sean Cosgrove at 74th overall in the 7th round.
Okay. We will select Jared Spurgeon, Minnesota.
Jared Spurgeon, another good top 4 defenseman. He's on the smaller side, but you never know it by watching him play. He's very aggressive and just a real gamer for Minnesota, and a guy who quietly puts up good numbers as well. A guy maybe you don't think of right off the top of your head for fantasy, but he's a guy that I think has made a lot of progress there. And Minnesota's a team that's really taking a new look under Bill Guerin. They've made a lot of roster changes and have a new head scout. So I think we're going to see Minnesota start to make some forward momentum, and Jared Spurgeon will certainly be a leader for the Minnesota Wild, which takes us to pick number 75 and back to John Kleinsasser.
Henry Jokiharju.
There you go. Henry Jokiharju of the Buffalo Sabres, formerly of the Chicago Blackhawks. That was an interesting trade when they swapped Alex Nylander for Henry Jokiharju, who I saw a lot of in Portland again in the Western Hockey League, a guy who's a real young up-and-coming defenseman, a guy who was a first-round pick in his draft year, and just a real skilled young defenseman who has a ton of potential fantasy-wise, much like Adam Boqvist, who was taken earlier on. Henry Jokiharju is a guy that can take a lot of strides. There's tons of room for growth in his game. So nice selection there, John, which takes us to Arlo Schultz at 76th overall in the 7th round.
Cam Fowler.
Cam Fowler of the Anaheim Ducks. A bit surprising Fowler's still on the board. He's a guy that seems to produce quite well in fantasy, and certainly a guy who's 28 years old. He does have a $6.5 million cap hit with 6 seasons left, but again, at 28 years old, that's right in the prime of his career still. So nice selection there, Arlo, with Cam Fowler of the Anaheim Ducks, which takes us back to the new MRA and Luc Grenier out in Montreal for the 77th overall selection in the 7th round.
So this time around, Montreal will take, I don't know if it's a risk, but I know it's a risk that comes from Sweden if it is. Defenseman Erik Karlsson. Lots of money.
There you go. Yeah, Erik Karlsson. He's had some injury issues, but we're talking about Erik Karlsson, perennial Norris contender, league MVP contender. He just obviously had some injuries, but you look at his career, and certainly that's for yourself with building such a young franchise as far as reaching the cap floor. Erik Karlsson's a guy who helps you do that and still potentially could bounce back and be a Norris Trophy candidate as for the San Jose Sharks next season. So I think that's a nice pick on many fronts as far as getting closer to the cap floor and getting a guy who could still be a big-time impact player. And a lot of people aren't thinking of him right now because he had the injuries, but if he bounces back, he's still one of the best defensemen in the league. That takes us to Charisse Scholes at 78th overall in the 7th round.
Larry, I'm going to select the defenseman Dmitry Orlov.
Dmitry Orlov of the Washington Capitals. Nice choice, Charisse. That's another solid top 4 defenseman. We're seeing a lot of those guys who are kind of right in the prime of their careers. He's at 28 years old, but again, guy who has a pretty nice cap hit at $5.1 million for 3 more seasons. And certainly Washington is a team that, as we've said with some of the other selections from the Capitals, they're not going away. They're going to continue to contend, and Orlov has a pretty big role there in Washington. So I like that selection as well. Takes us to Hernan Salas at 79th overall in the 7th round.
Yeah, I'll take a WHL guy as well. I'll take defenseman from the Minnesota Wild, Matt Dumba.
There you go, Matt Dumba. Again, a bit surprised Matt Dumba is still on the board as a guy who can certainly impact many categories in fantasy and has had a lot of offensive potential. Again, we've mentioned that Minnesota Wild team, they kind of fly under the radar, but I think they're really going to start to trend up. And whether they get a new coach or they keep their current coach, I think obviously Bruce Boudreau is gone there now, so they're kind of in a Dean Evason sort of the interim coach. But it'd be interesting to see if they retain him or bring in somebody who's maybe a more offensive-minded coach. But if they do, I think you'll see Matt Dumba be one of those guys at 25 years old who still has a ton of fantasy potential. That takes us to Dean Millard of Duckman's Domination at 80th overall in the 7th round.
Yeah, we're going to take one of the many mistakes that the Edmonton Oilers made in trading away, and Jeff Petrie of the Montreal Canadiens.
Nice intro on Petrie, and that's definitely true. He's a guy who's found a home in Montreal with the Canadiens and really turned into an excellent top 4 defenseman. And I'm sure there are some regrets from Edmonton's perspective to let Jeff Petrie get away, knowing that what his career has become, he'd look pretty good there in Edmonton still. So nice pick on Jeff Petrie for Duckman's Domination, which takes us to Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club at 81st overall in the 7th round.
Vengeance are proud to select Jonas Brodin from the Minnesota Wild.
Nicely done. So I think in the 7th round, we had 3 defensemen from the Minnesota Wild. We had Jared Spurgeon, Matt Dumba, and now Jonas Brodin. So that's a quick succession. Minnesota Wild defensemen are jumping off the board, but all 3 of those guys are very solid top 4 defensemen who, again, as I keep saying, depending on the coaching situation in Minnesota and the style they're going to play, I think they have some good young offense coming, and that'll help those defensemen's fantasy stats bump up as well, which takes us to Cameron Turner. And Cameron is going to select Esa Lindell from the Dallas Stars. We've got a run of defensemen here. I believe that's how many in a row? We've got it must be 10 or 15 defensemen in a row here. We've had fly off the board, starting with Jesse Gill at the start of the 7th round. It's been all defensemen so far in the 7th round. No forwards, no goaltenders in the 7th round. But Esa Lindell is, again, much like Jonas Brodin, very similar player. Esa Lindell has a pretty nice cap hit at 5.8 he's locked up for 5 more seasons. And we'll see how much of a fantasy impact he has, but certainly a top 4 defenseman who can impact a lot of the categories that are there in the UFHL, which brings us to Aaron and Brandon at 83rd overall in the 7th round.
Sorry, Larry, I missed that last pick again, man.
Essa Lindell.
Okay, awesome. We'll take Noah Dobson.
Noah Dobson of the New York Islanders, another one of these top 10, or I believe he's 11th overall pick in his draft year. But another really young guy with a huge ceiling who can really trend up as far as fantasy defensemen go. A few years from now, we might be talking about Noah Dobson as a potential Norris contender, and certainly a nice guy to build around in a dynasty fantasy league such as the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League. So nice pick there for Aaron and Brandon, which takes us to Jeff Brown and Brian Smith to close out the 7th round and start the 8th round with picks number 84 and 85.
Eric Brandstrom.
Eric Brandstrom, another, so back-to-back, the entire 7th round was defensemen. We had no forwards and no goaltenders go in the 7th round. We had 12 straight defensemen, but Eric Brandstrom's much like Noah Dobson, a young offensive-minded defenseman who's, you see how Ottawa is going to trend up in the future, especially they have 2 top 5 picks in this year's draft. Eric Brandstrom came over in that Mark Stone trade. He was the key piece they got back from Vegas. He was a first-round pick in his draft year, so I think you're going to see Eric Brandstrom, much like Noah Dobson, 2 guys that are going to trend up and become household names in fantasy leagues in the years to come. And back to you guys at 85th overall.
Joel Eriksson-Ek.
Joel Eriksson-Ek of the Minnesota Wild. Again, another Minnesota player who has more. He was a first-round pick in his NHL draft year. He's kind of in a two-way center, kind of in that third-line role. But again, with Mikko Koivu's career winding down, potentially ending, I think you're going to see Joel Eriksson-Ek move up in that depth chart. And a guy who, again, entering a contract year next season, he's going to want to get a bigger number and hopefully double his salary or cap hit. So he has a lot of motivation for next season and could be a nice player for Jeff and Brian. Back to Aaron and Brandon at 86th overall with the 2nd pick of the 8th round.
We'll take Eric Gustafson.
Eric Gustafson, currently of the Calgary Flames, formerly the Chicago Blackhawks, and to be determined for his next team. I believe he's an unrestricted free agent this offseason as well, but a guy who isn't the biggest name, but obviously you look at his stats in Chicago, certainly, and he's making the transition to Calgary, but certainly a guy who had a big fantasy impact last season, and this season he'll try and have an impact for Calgary in the play-in round for the Stanley Cup playoffs to come here in a couple weeks, and hopefully, if not stay in Calgary, earn himself a nice payday somewhere else. But certainly another top four defenseman who has some good fantasy upside. And we're back to Cameron Turner, who is taking Brandon Tanev of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Tanev has a nice cap hit at $3.5 million for 5 more seasons. That was a big contract when he signed, but I think he's one of those guys that just consistently contributes in the middle 6. Maybe not going to be the biggest scorer or the biggest name in fantasy, but a nice contract to have. And as we know, when this draft is over, most of these rosters are going to look very similar to NHL rosters. You'll have 2nd, 3rd, 4th line players by the end of this draft. So Brandon Tanev certainly is one of those guys who can play middle 6 role and has a nice cap hit to build around at $3.5 million. That takes us to Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club at 88th overall in the 8th round.
Vengeance Hockey Club are pleased to select from the New York Islanders Anthony Beauvillier.
Anthony Beauvillier, another one of these young, up-and-coming, kind of like an Oliver Bjorkstrand type guy who was taken sort of in the 2nd round of his draft year, but just kind of entering the prime of his career, 23 years old. He's got another guy who's entering a contract year for next season, looking to get a raise. So look out for Anthony Beauvillier as a guy who maybe takes a big jump as far as fantasy production goes next season for the New York Islanders. That takes us to Dean Millard and Duckman's Domination at 89th overall in the 8th round.
We're going to take Jason Zucker from Pittsburgh.
Jason Zucker, potentially Sidney Crosby's wingman for the upcoming playoffs, but certainly a guy who scored his share of goals in Minnesota, and now you put him on a loaded Pittsburgh team, and I think you're going to see Jason Zucker certainly be a guy that has an impact for Duckman's domination as far as fantasy goes. And again, a guy who's got 3 years left at $5.5 million cap hit. That's a nice number for Jason Zucker, and I think Pittsburgh is going to be a good home for him. That takes us to Hernan Salas at 90th overall in the 8th round.
I'll take from the Colorado Avalanche, Jonas Donskoy.
Jonas Donskoy, formerly of the San Jose Sharks, made a really smooth transition to the Colorado Avalanche, fit in well there with playing under fellow Finn Mikko Rantanen. So Donskoy is a guy who, again, nice cap hit at $3.9 million for 3 more seasons, but that Colorado team's on the rise, and whether Donskoy is a second or third line guy, he's got a nice cap hit and certainly contributes fantasy-wise, which takes us to Charisse Schultz at 91st overall in the 8th round.
I'm going to select forward Andrew Mangiapane.
Andrew Mangiapane of the Calgary Flames, guy who is largely underrated in my opinion. I think he struggled to get the contract he got last season, and he's trying to earn a bigger one for next season. Again, coming in right around the league minimum at $715,000, but a guy who just manages to produce at every level. You look at him, he's kind of always been an under-the-radar guy, kind of like a Jonathan Marchessault almost. Could develop into that type of player, but a guy who's been underrated and certainly starting to take on a bigger role in Calgary, and I think we could see some serious fantasy potential coming out of Andrew Mangiapane in the coming seasons. That takes us back to Luc Grenier of the new MRA in Montreal for the 92nd overall selection in the 8th round.
I don't know if we will please everyone in Montreal, but I guess that we will make some people real happy, and we will take another huge risk in Montreal, selecting PK Subban.
There you go. You're right. That might not go over too well with the fan base there in Montreal with the way PK Subban left the city. That was a great intro for PK Subban. But you look at that defense now. You got Erik Karlsson and PK Subban, and obviously they're helping you reach the cap floor. But 2 guys that are potential, Norris Trophy type guys, despite their cap hits, if they return to form. But obviously PK Subban and Erik Karlsson both have the injury risk, which is probably why we're seeing them go in these mid to late rounds. 8th round pick PK Subban, not a few years ago in fantasy leagues, he would have been right up there in the 1st or 2nd round. But certainly he needs his back to hold up and needs to keep his focus on hockey. And hopefully, again, Lindy Ruff could be the answer for PK Subban to help get some more fantasy potential out of him for the new MRA next season. That takes us to Arlo Schultz at 93rd overall in the 8th round.
Nino Niederreiter.
Nino Niederreiter of the Carolina Hurricanes, formerly of the Minnesota Wild. That was quite the trade Carolina pulled off there, getting Niederreiter for Victor Rask. And I think Nino Niederreiter, a guy, again, who's 27 years old, right in the prime of his career. I think he's going to score some more goals in the years to come for the Carolina Hurricanes. So nice pick, Arlo. That takes us to 94th overall in the 8th round with John Kleinsasser and the Bandits on the clock.
Alex Nylander.
Alex Nylander of the Chicago Blackhawks. And how about that? The Bandits have taken both sides of that trade. They got Henry Jokiharju, and now they've taken Alex Nylander from that 1-to-1 trade. So that's a cool little storyline within the draft for John to get both those guys. But Alex Nylander is a guy who has a ton of offensive potential. And I think you look at his brother, William Nylander in Toronto, who had a big year with Austin Matthews. And I think Alex Nylander in junior, some people said Alex was more talented than William. So we'll see how Alex's career trends, but he's in a good spot in Chicago with a lot of offensive weapons, and I think he'll find a home there. His dad, Michael Nylander, played there, and so he was happy to be a Chicago Blackhawk. And I think there's a lot of potential to come from Alex Nylander, just 22 years old, and another guy entering a contract year who's going to want to potentially earn himself a long-term deal after next season. So that takes us to Sean Cosgrove and the New England Whalers at 95th overall in the 8th round. Or sorry, Sean, I keep saying Whalers because of the jersey you're wearing.
That's all right.
I'm watching the jersey, but you're the Warriors.
The Warriors like what they've seen from Devon Toews on the island.
Yeah, lots to like with Devon Toews, a guy who sort of took a while to get to the NHL, but once he got there, he's sort of like a Jared Spurgeon type guy, smaller guy, but really offensive minded. And I think he's a guy that's just going to continue to get with the Islanders. Johnny Boychuk and those guys are getting up there. So I think Devon Toews is going to, him and Noah Dobson are really going to kind of lead the offense from the back end, along with Ryan Pulock with the Islanders. So nice selection there for your defense, Sean. And we're on to the end of the 8th round and the start of the 9th round with back-to-back selections at 96th and 97th overall. Jesse Gill.
Well, after selecting 5 defensemen, I better get back to forwards. I'm finally going to draft a Leaf here. Shockingly, took me this long. From the Toronto Maple Leafs, little underrated guy, Zach Hyman. And then right after that, I might as well add some salary because I'm a little thin right now. And one of the better available players right now for total points, Jacob Vrasek from the Philadelphia Flyers.
There you go. You mentioned it. Not everybody knows you're a Leafs fan, Jesse, but you cat's out of the bag now. Jesse's a Leafs fan, and Zach Hyman is one of the better Leafs available for sure in this redraft. So it's good for Jesse to snatch up Zach Hyman and Jakub Voracek. Obviously, much like PK Subban and some of the other guys we've been talking about, it's surprising to see Jakub Voracek going almost 100th overall, 97th overall in a fantasy draft when he's only 30 years old. He's got a lot of good hockey left in him. He's got a decent cap hit at $8.25 million. But I think Jakub Voracek's a guy who consistently puts up, 65, 70 points season after season. So, and I don't think he's done at 30 years old. So a nice pick there at almost 100th overall, but 97th overall, which takes us back to Sean Cosgrove with the Warriors at 98th overall in the 9th round.
I think he's still there. We're going to select a veteran, Alex Radulov.
He is there. Yeah. Alex Radulov of the Dallas Stars. Good Russian goal scorer who, he's fit in well there with Jamie Benn and Tyler Seguin in Dallas. That was a good move for him and a good home for him. And certainly he's 34 years old, but he went back to the KHL and played for a bit. And so I think he's got some miles left in him as far as NHL miles and fantasy miles. So nice pick there by Sean. Takes us to 99th overall in the 9th round. The Bandits and John Kleinsasser are back on the clock.
Shane Gostisbehere.
Shane Gostisbehere of the Philadelphia Flyers, defenseman who obviously has had some real good fantasy seasons and some not so good fantasy seasons. He's kind of been hot and cold as far as fantasy goes, but certainly a guy who can put up points, can play the power play, and can challenge Ivan Provorov and Travis Sanheim for those power play minutes. And you look 3 more seasons at $4.5 million cap hit. That's a nice number for Shane Gostisbehere, and a guy who certainly could bounce back fantasy wise. Like I said, his fantasy careers kind of went in waves. One good year, one bad year, and then he's coming off a down year. So look for Shane Gostisbehere to potentially have a big rebound season next year. Now we're at the 100th overall pick, and Arlo Scholz is on the clock in the 9th round.
Zach Sanford.
Zach Sanford of the St. Louis Blues, power forward who will impact a lot of categories, and a guy who he's just the kind of the prototypical Blues player. Craig Berube loves a player like Zach Sanford, and I think he's a guy that certainly will have a role there for the years to come, and kind of a poor man's Tom Wilson, you could say, that type of player potentially for St. Louis. That takes us to 101st overall in the 9th round and back to Montreal with the new MRA, Luc Grenier.
Montreal will select Pekka Rinne.
Pekka Rinne, we have a goaltender. We haven't had a goaltender go for quite some time, but Pekka Rinne, obviously one of the league's top goaltenders in his prime, and he's sort of getting towards that back nine now, much like Jonathan Quick as well. Henrik Lundqvist is a name we haven't heard yet in this UFHL redraft. Some of those guys are kind of in their mid to late 30s. Pekka Rinne at 37 years old. He's got one season left at $5 million, and he's sort of battling there in Nashville with UC Saros as far as who's going to be the number one goaltender going forward. It'll be interesting to see who starts for Nashville in the playoffs. But Pekka Rinne still definitely a high-quality goaltender and tends to be good in the playoffs. So we'll see how that pick pans out for Luke, but certainly an established goaltender going to the new MRA, which takes us to 102nd overall in the 9th round, and Sharice Schultz is on the clock.
Larry, I'm going to select Patrick Hornquist.
Patrick Hornquist of the Pittsburgh Penguins, another one of those gritty wingers who impacts a lot of fantasy categories and who consistently puts the puck in the net for the Penguins. He's been kind of one of their unsung heroes throughout their run over the last decade, and still has 3 seasons left at $5.3 million, which is a pretty nice cap hit for a guy like Patrick Hornquist. So nice pick there, Sharice. On to Hernan Salas at 103rd overall in the 9th round.
I'll take defenseman Brandon Montour.
Brandon Montour of the Buffalo Sabres, formerly of the Anaheim Ducks. Brandon Montour is another guy kind of like Shane Gostisbehere, who has that offensive fantasy potential and just hasn't quite produced to the level that maybe he's capable of. But it'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of trade rumors right now. I've heard of Brandon Montour heading out of Buffalo potentially. So if he does get traded, we'll see where he lands and how that works out for him. But he's a guy who could have good fantasy upside in the future. That takes us to Dean Millard of Duckman's Domination at 104th overall in the 9th round.
Well, I'm used to taking orders from Hernan from when he used to produce the radio show we worked together. So I'll follow in his footsteps and take Casey Middlestat of the Buffalo Sabres.
There we go. Casey Middlestat is off the board. A guy who, again, top 10 pick, tons of potential in Casey Middlestat. You know, I look at Ralph Kruger there as the coach in Buffalo, and a guy who can really coach offense and get that out of players. I think the AHL experience this year for Casey Middlestat was probably good for his growth, good learning experience for him, shows him what it takes to play and stick in the NHL. And I think when he comes back, he could be a guy who really has a lot of fantasy upside going forward. So I like that pick. That takes us to the Vengeance Hockey Club and Jeff McCarthy at 105th overall in the 9th round.
Dean, stop taking the players that I would like. I would really appreciate it. With this pick, we'll select from the Winnipeg Jets, Jack Roslovic.
Jack Roslovic, that's a nice selection. A little bit further along in his development than Casey Middlestat, but certainly a similar type player from the U.S. National Team Development Program, and a guy who at one point kind of wanted out of Winnipeg, didn't really have a role there. And this season, he's kind of moved up the depth chart. I think he's happier there, but certainly a guy who has some fantasy upside going forward as a first-round NHL draft pick in his draft year as well. We're up to Cameron Turner, who is selecting from the Nashville Predators forward Austin Watson. Austin Watson, obviously another one of those guys, kind of like a Zach Sanford, power forward type guy, can chip in offensively, but certainly he's going to get some penalty minutes. He's going to get plenty of hits. He shoots the puck quite a bit. And you look at his cap hit, 3 more seasons remaining at $1.5 million. So that's a nice low cap hit for that sort of middle of the lineup for Cameron Turner. So nice selection there. We're on to Aaron Bell and Brandon at 107th overall in the 9th round.
We'll take Evgeny Dadonov.
Evgeny Dadonov, currently in the Florida Panthers, much like Mike Hoffman, pending unrestricted free agent. So it'll be interesting to see where Dadonov ends up and what he gets paid for next season. But certainly a guy who can score a lot of goals, and I think he found a good home for himself in Florida. I think that was a good fit for him. So if Florida can afford it, I know they're talking about doing some budget slashing, free up some cap space in Florida. So we'll see if Dadonov's in the cards to stay there. But if not, he brings a lot of skill and kind of like a younger Alex Radulov potentially for another franchise in the NHL, and certainly has good upside for fantasy as well. To close out the 9th round and to start the 10th round, with back-to-back picks at 108th and 109th overall, we have Jeff Brown and Brian Smith.
Adam Gaudette.
With the 108th overall pick, they've selected Adam Gaudette of the Vancouver Canucks, another young forward who has kind of like a Jack Roslovic, who has a lot of potential fantasy upside. He was a really good player in college, put up really good numbers there. And Vancouver is another team that has sort of two different ends of the lineup. They got some older players and some younger players, but Adam Gaudette's one of those guys who should trend up in the years to come. So I like that pick for sure. And back to Jeff and Brian right away again to start the 10th round at 109th overall.
Boone Jenner.
Boone Jenner from the Columbus Blue Jackets, power forward type guy who impacts a lot of categories. I know we've said that about a lot of players in this draft, but that's something you always got to take into account in fantasy is what are the categories and who's going to impact the most categories type thing. And Boone Jenner is one of those guys, $3.75 million cap hit, 2 years remaining. A guy who, again, with the mass exodus in Columbus, we mentioned it with Oliver Bjorkstrand, but when you lose guys like Matt Duchene and Artemi Panarin, you need people to step up, and Boone Jenner is going to have a bigger role under John Tortorella there. Now that we're into the 10th round, guys, I don't know, time-wise for you guys, do you like the commentary? Do you want me to cut it out and just roll on with the picks now that we're in the 10th round, heading towards round 23?
I love your commentary, Larry.
Yeah, keep going with the commentary. It makes it more interesting.
Okay,
gives guys enough time to make their picks too. It's working pretty good.
Is it? Okay, yeah. If we start running late, like 3 o'clock or whatever, and people need to get going, just let me know and I'll cut out the commentary and we'll speed up the picks. But for now, we'll keep it going. We're at Aaron and Brandon at 110th overall in the 10th round.
We actually have a bet going, Larry, to see which is the first player taken that you don't know what to say about them. So we'll see when that happens.
Oh, that's gold.
Well, here, we'll make it easy for you, Larry. We'll take a guy that everybody knows, Ryan Suter.
There you go. Ryan Suter of the Minnesota Wild. Still much like we said with Erik Karlsson and PK Subban, still a top pairing defenseman. But one thing with Suter, he had the ankle injury the one season. But besides that, he's been a pretty durable guy. And 5 seasons left at 7.538 cap hit. But again, I think Ryan Suter has been durable throughout his career. And I don't know, he's skated a lot of miles because he logs some of the most minutes in the NHL. But I think his body generally holds up pretty well. So that's a nice selection for Aaron and Brandon at 110th overall. Again, you surprised to see Ryan Suter there. But again, with salary cap and everything else, there's considerations. And Ryan Suter is off the board at 110th in the 10th round, which takes us to Cameron Turner. And Cameron has selected Andreas Johnsson of the Toronto Maple Leafs. A guy who has kind of rode shotgun a bit with Austin Matthews and William Nylander, but can play kind of up and down the lineup for Toronto. A very versatile guy. And it'll be interesting if Toronto has to make some cap decisions as well, whether Andreas Johnsson is a long-term Leaf. But Cameron has stolen one of the Leafs from Jesse Gill. So there goes another Leaf in Andreas Johnsson, and we're back to the Vengeance Hockey Club at 112 overall in the 10th round. Jeff McCarthy is on the clock.
We are proud to select from the New Jersey Devils, Pavel Zacha.
Pavel Zacha, former top 10 pick for New Jersey in his NHL draft year, a guy who hasn't really taken that step offensively yet. But again, you look at Lindy Ruff, and can Lindy Ruff he's always had an offensive-minded team and had a lot of puck possession and attacking mindset. And if he can just get that next gear out of Pavel Zacha, he's only 23 years old. He's a guy that could certainly become a legitimate impact player as far as fantasy goes, which takes us to Dean Millard and Duckman's domination at 113th overall in the 10th round.
We'll take Alex Edler.
Alex Edler of the Vancouver Canucks, who, again, he's a guy kind of like Ryan Suter, who's not the youngest defenseman, but continually, he's 34, so a year younger than Ryan Suter, but a guy who continually makes an impact both in fantasy and in real life. He's a very solid defenseman, former Kelowna Rocket from his junior days. He was an import here in Kelowna, where I'm based, but at 1 year left at $6 million, and then we'll see where Alex Edler's career potentially trends with Vancouver in a bit of a cap crunch as well. Is he going to be a long-term guy there, or is he maybe a guy that Seattle looks at for the expansion draft? Or, well, it'll be interesting to see where Alex Edler's career goes after next season, but still a very impactful guy fantasy-wise. I know he sort of split the top pairing power play role there in Vancouver with Quinn Hughes, and will that sort of be a torch passing next season where Quinn Hughes takes the number one role, or will Alex Edler still have it? I'm sure Edler won't give it away easily, so especially being a contract year for him, he'd like another payday. So nice pick there with Alex Edler, and we're on to Hernan Salas at 114th overall in the 10th round.
Yeah, I'll take from the Ottawa Senators, Colin White.
Colin White of the Ottawa Senators, another one of those first-round picks who hasn't quite taken the step fantasy-wise yet, but has a lot of potential. And kind of like a Jack Roslovic, I guess they're very comparable guys. They're both 23 years old. Colin White does have a nice, healthy contract, 5 years at $4.75 million cap hit. So when he does take that fantasy step, he could be a bargain at that cap hit. Right now, it might seem a little high because he hasn't done a ton fantasy-wise. But again, we said Ottawa's only going to get better. There's only one way to go for Ottawa, and that's up. So Colin White could be a big part of the Senators' future and contribute more to a fantasy team as well in the years to come. That takes us to 115th overall in the 10th round, and Charisse Schultz.
All right, I'm going to be picking Scott Lawton.
Scott Lawton of the Philadelphia Flyers, a guy who I believe has a nice cap hit as well, but certainly a guy that has a big impact in that middle of the lineup for Philadelphia. A character guy who can be a fantasy guy at times as well. He's got $2.3 million cap hit. He's entering a contract year, but I think Scott Lawton's one of those guys that has another level potentially to his game as well. So we'll see how Scott Lawton moves going forward, but certainly he impacts a lot of categories too. So nice selection, Treese. We're back to Montreal and the new NRA or new MRA, Luke Grenier at 116th overall in the 10th round.
We will select defenseman Hampus Lindholm.
Hampus Lindholm of the Anaheim Ducks. Another one of those guys, sort of like those Minnesota Wild defensemen who they don't get a ton of credit for what they can bring to a fantasy team, but certainly Hampus Lindholm, another first-round NHL draft pick in his draft year, and a guy who's still right in the prime of his career, and he certainly is a contributor as far as in real life as a potential top-pairing shutdown guy, but he brings it in fantasy as well, and I think his fantasy impact is often underrated. And again, I think Anaheim's a team that should trend up in the years to come under Dallas Eakins, and we'll see Hampus Lindholm have a bigger impact and certainly help the new MRA. Next up at 117th overall in the 10th round is Arlo Scholes.
Oliver Shillington.
Oliver Shillington of the Calgary Flames. And you'll notice the spelling of his name if you're not super familiar with him. It looks like it's Kylington, but it is Shillington. It's the way the Swedish pronunciation is. So Oliver Shillington of the Calgary Flames, guy who was a real enigma in his draft year because he could have been a top 10 pick with some of his offensive ability and his skating ability. But his two-way game wasn't there, and he's kind of been a work in progress for Calgary. But if it clicks for Oliver Shillington in the years to come, he can be certainly an asset fantasy-wise because he has the skating and he has the offensive ability. He's only 23 years old, so he could be a player on the rise in the years to come. At 118th overall in the 10th round, the Bandits and John Kleinsasser are back on the clock.
We'll take Luke Cunnin.
Luke Cunnin of the Minnesota Wild. Again, Minnesota, a team that, much like Joel Eriksson-Ek, a previous pick, Luke Cunnin sort of right in that middle of the lineup. Mikko Koivu's not going to be around much longer, so where does Luke Cunnin fit in that picture, and can he take on more of an offensive role and certainly be more of a fantasy guy going forward? But a young player who was a first-round pick in his NHL draft year and has a lot of upside, and certainly is a physical player as well. He'll bring penalty minutes. He'll bring hits. He shoots the puck a lot. So Luke Cunnin can be certainly a nice fit for the Bandits. That takes us to the Warriors and Sean Cosgrove at 119th overall in the 10th round.
All right, we're going to take the New York Rangers, the young guy, Philip Chytil.
There you go. Yeah, Philip, I believe they pronounce it Heidel, but yeah, Philip Chytil, yeah. Philip Heidel, but yeah, certainly a nice young player there who has an offensive skill set. He's almost like a young David Krejci. That's who I compare him to. He's got that type of skill set and upside. So I think another guy who was a first-round pick in his draft year, and the Rangers are a team that has a lot of firepower up front, but I think as the years go, I think you're going to see Philip Chytil make more of an impact. And I think you look at him entering a contract year, he's another guy who's going to want to secure a longer-term deal with a bigger cap hit. So I think Philip Chytil will certainly be a nice addition to the Warriors. And now to close out the 10th round and start the 11th round with picks 120 and 121 overall, Jesse Gill.
I'm going to pick a couple. They're not really young anymore, but they are going to help my offense because I went so heavy on young defensemen early. So I'm going to pick from the San Jose Sharks, hopefully a guy that has a little bit more of a bounce back year, Logan Couture. And then from the Minnesota Wild, Eric Staal.
There you go. Those are, again, you're getting those guys at 120th and 121st overall. Even a couple years ago, there's no way they would be available at those spots. Logan Couture especially, he's got the contract, 7 years, $8 million cap hit, but he's only 31 years old. He's not, I wouldn't say Logan Couture's over the hill by any means. I think he'll be a meaningful fantasy player for the Flying Pylons for the foreseeable future still. And Eric Staal, he is a bit on the older side at 35, but we've written off Eric Staal before. When he was in Carolina, a lot of people said he was washed up there, and look what he's done for Minnesota under Bruce Boudreau. He really had a resurgence. So I don't think Eric Stahl's done either. A guy who's going into a contract year, he'll want to prolong his career, and if Minnesota does become a more offensive-minded team, I think Eric Staal will certainly have a hand in that still, especially if Mikko Koivu retires. I think Eric Stahl's sort of the obvious choice to lead that team going forward. That takes us back to Sean Cosgrove and the Warriors at 122nd overall in the 11th round.
Yeah, the Warriors are going to stay young. We're going to go to the Detroit Red Wings and select Michael Rasmussen.
Michael Rasmussen played his junior with the Tri-City Americans. He was a really, obviously he's got great size as a center, and he's really good in front of net front presence on the power play, deflections and redirections, but I think he can get that physical edge going for him, and I think he can, with his size and his smarts, I think he's a smart hockey player. I think he's got fantasy upside for the years to come, even though he hasn't had a big role to date in New Jersey, and he played in the AHL this season, but again, that's all part of the development. He's only 21 years old, and I think Detroit's only going to get younger. They're going to build around their current first-round picks, which he was one of them, and I think he's going to be a big part of the Red Wings' future. So, and as well as the Warriors in the UFHL. That takes us to pick number 123 in the 11th round, which puts the Bandits and John Kleinsasser back on the clock.
Josh Manson.
Josh Manson of the Anaheim Ducks, another top four defenseman there. And Manson's one of those guys, he's going to bring penalty minutes. He hits a lot, and his offense has kind of been hit and miss as far as fantasy goes, but he's a guy who certainly will impact a lot of categories as a defenseman and bring the penalty minutes as well. So Josh Manson, son of Dave Manson, a lot of people remember him from his playing days, but 2 years left on his contract at $4.1 million for Josh Manson. Arlo Scholes is up at 124th overall in the 11th round.
Brett Connolly.
Brett Connolly of the Florida Panthers, formerly of the Washington Capitals, Tampa Bay Lightning. He's had a good career as a goal scorer, which we saw a lot of in junior with the Prince George Cougars in the Western Hockey League. Again, another guy who was a top 10 pick in his NHL draft year, but certainly he fit in well in Florida. He played sort of second line for the most part, so he's a top 6 forward there, and $3.5 million for 3 more seasons. So Brett Connolly will be a nice addition for Arlo, which takes us back to Montreal in the new MRA. Luke Grenier at 125th overall in the 11th round.
MRA will select, if he's still available, I'm not sure, Emil Bemstrom.
Emil Benstrom is available, so he's off to the new MRA. Goal-scoring winger out of Sweden who plays for the Columbus Blue Jackets. He was an older rookie this year, but a guy who came with quite a bit of height from Sweden and didn't disappoint. He, again, like Oliver Bjorkstrand, they lost a lot of offense in Columbus, and Emil Bemstrom helped them help make up that offense. And we'll see him against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the play-in round, but I think he's a guy that'll surprise some people in the years to come. So he's only 21 years old. I thought he was a little bit older, but a late bloomer, you could say. He wasn't a real first-round NHL draft pick, but he had a big year in the Swedish League the year before and was an effective rookie for Columbus. So nice pick by Luke. On to Charisse Schultz at 126th overall in the 11th round.
I'm going to select Dennis Cholowski.
Dennis Cholowski, another one of those first-round picks for the Detroit Red Wings, a defenseman who, much like Michael Rasmussen, spent a lot of time developing in the AHL, which Steve Yzerman's fine with. He learned from Ken Holland. They like to slow play and overcook, or however you say it, their prospects. And Dennis Cholowski was a first-round pick who had some success in the AHL and then took a little bit of a step back and had to learn the ropes a bit in the AHL. But a 22-year-old defenseman who played junior with the Prince George Cougars as well as the Chilliwack Chiefs in the BCHL. So a guy who has some good fantasy upside as well, real good skater and some offensive tools in Dennis Cholowski. That takes us to pick number 127 in the 11th round, and Hernan Salas.
I'll take from the New York Rangers, Jesper Fast.
Jesper Fast from the New York Rangers, sort of one of those middle 6 forwards. A guy who is probably underrated, his skill set, kind of like Philip Heidel. They could be line mates there with the Rangers. I think they did play together a bit, but Jesper Fast has sort of been under the radar, underrated, but I think he's coming into a contract year, if I'm not mistaken, or potentially he is a UFA, so it'll be interesting to see if he stays with the Rangers after this season or if he moves on in his career. And if he goes somewhere else, we'll see how he fits in and if he maybe does take that step fantasy-wise, because I think there is some potential for more offense in Jesper Fast. That takes us to Dean Millard and Duckman's domination at 128th overall in the 11th round.
We will take Jake Gardner.
Jake Gardner of the Carolina Hurricanes, formerly of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Certainly a top 4 defenseman, no doubt, and has that sort of upside to even potentially play on the top pair if need be. So he's a guy at 128th overall. Bit surprising he's still there. He can put up some points as he did in Toronto behind Morgan Riley. He's only 30 years old with a $4.05 million cap hit for 3 more years. So Jake Gardner will be very serviceable for Duckman's domination, which takes us to Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club at 129th overall in the 11th round.
Eric Cernak.
Eric Cernak from the Tampa Bay Lightning, another guy who kind of like Josh Manson, I guess. He's more physical defenseman. He's certainly will bring some penalty minutes, will bring a lot of hits. He shoots the puck quite a bit, and he's only 23 years old. So I think Eric Cernak's a guy who's trending up, and I think there may be some more offense there to come in Eric Cernak. But certainly Tampa Bay is real high on him, and he's developed into a true top 4 defender for the Lightning at just 23 years old, which takes us to Cameron Turner at 130th overall in the 11th round. We're just waiting on Cameron's pick here, but he's following along on Telegram, so I'm sure he'll have it entered here soon. Cameron is selecting Connor Murphy of the Chicago Blackhawks, defenseman, formerly of the Arizona Coyotes. A guy who, again, another physical type defenseman who can contribute offensively at times. He's got 2 years left at $3.85 million. Sort of right in that prime area of his career at 27 years old. And I think Connor Murphy could have an impact for the Blackhawks in their series against the Edmonton Oilers. I think he'll be one of those guys. Obviously, Duncan Keith will be matched up against Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl. I think Connor Murphy's defensive play could shine in that series against Edmonton, trying to slow down the Oilers' offense. That takes us to Aaron and Brandon at 131st overall in the 11th round.
With the 131st pick, we're happy to take Zach Sanford.
Well, Zach Sanford is gone. He went. Let's see here. We are not happy. Zach Sanford went 100th overall to Arlo Scholz. Previous round.
Can we make a trade? No, we're just kidding. Just give us 2 seconds here. We will.
Yeah, no rush.
We'll take Ryan Donato.
Ryan Donato of the Minnesota Wild, formerly of the Boston Bruins. And that was an interesting trade when Ryan Donato went to Minnesota, because he was another guy who grew up in the Boston area and seemed like a long-term Bruin, but he ends up in Minnesota. And he's a guy who, again, has a 24 years old, $1.9 million cap hit going into a contract year next season. He's going to want to take on a bigger role in Minnesota and really carve out a role for himself there, but a guy who can score, who can potentially make an impact on a fantasy team as well. So nice selection of Ryan Donato. That takes us to the end of the 11th round and the start of the 12th round with picks 132 and 133. Jeff Brown and Brian Smith are back on the clock.
Jakob Silfverberg.
With the 132nd overall pick, they are selecting Jakob Silfverberg of the Anaheim Ducks, a guy who scores a good amount of goals and certainly contributes to the top 6 role in Anaheim. So a nice selection there at 132nd overall. And back to you guys at 133rd.
Radko Gudas.
Radko Gudas, currently now of the Washington Capitals, defenseman, a real rugged defenseman, formerly of the Tampa Bay Lightning as well as the Philadelphia Flyers. So a player who's 30 years old, upcoming unrestricted free agent this summer. We'll see which way his contract trends. He's at 3.35 now. Will it go up or down? It'll be interesting to see. But he brings a lot of value as like I said, a rugged physical guy, and he's good for a suspension a season, which will bump up those penalty minute stats for sure. So Radko Gudas played his junior in Everett in the Western Hockey League. He was fun to watch there, and he's certainly a guy who plays on the edge in the NHL, and a nice addition to your guys' fantasy roster. Back to Aaron and Brandon at 134th overall as we work our way back in the 12th round.
We will take our second goalie and Jake Allen.
Jake Allen of the St. Louis Blues. Obviously, he had a nice bounce back year, which goes underrated because Jordan Binnington's obviously emerged as the number 1 goaltender in St. Louis and backstop them to the last year's Stanley Cup championship. But there was a lot of people sort of pushing Jake Allen out the door there, and he sort of almost platooned this season and had a nice bounce back year in St. Louis. So Jake Allen will be interesting. He's entering a contract year at $4.35 million. It'll be interesting to see if he stays in St. Louis, if they move on from him, or where he ends up. And kind of like Antti Raanta in a similar situation, Jake Allen, he's only 29 years old. He could still emerge as a 1A, 1B type goalie somewhere else and potentially still end up as an NHL starter. That takes us to Cameron Turner at 135th overall in the 12th round. And Cameron will take Kevin Hayes of the Philadelphia Flyers, formerly of the New York Rangers and briefly of the Winnipeg Jets. Kevin Hayes got a nice big contract from the Flyers, and for the most part, he went out and earned it in his first season in Philly. He's obviously he's a huge guy. He's a big center, and he He plays that really good second, third line role there in Philly, kind of between him and Sean Couturier. And then obviously if Nolan Patrick's healthy, they're going to have a really good middle of the lineup for their forwards. So that's a nice selection for Cameron Turner to grab Kevin Hayes, which takes us back to the Vengeance Hockey Club and Jeff McCarthy at 136th overall in the 12th round.
Oh, you caught me stuffing my face here with food. We will take Justin Abdelkader.
Justin Abdelkader of the Detroit Red Wings. Obviously, he's got a fairly healthy contract, and he's one of those guys who has been, it's a tough spot for Justin Abdelkader because Detroit is rebuilding, getting younger, and I guess his contracts, there's nothing wrong with that. $4.25 million for 3 more years. When he signed it, it was a long-term deal, and some people sort of raised eyebrows over it, but he's still a guy who can impact a lot of categories. It's sort of a power forward type guy, and a guy who I'm sure enjoyed the time off during COVID and rest his body. And I mean, he's not coming back because Detroit won't be in the play-in round, but he'll be very refreshed for next season and healthy. And hopefully Justin Abdelkader will be back to being a fantasy presence for the Vengeance Hockey Club. That takes us to Dean Millard at 137th overall in the 12th round. Duckman's domination is back on the clock.
All right, well, Hernan and I have a bet going to see who can come out with the lowest cap hit. I'm about to go past him in this one, but there's a reason because I love camping, and drafting this player comes with a lifetime supply of hot dogs, so we're taking Phil Kessel.
There you go. That's it doesn't get much better for an intro than that for Phil Kessel. I can hear Jesse Gill laughing from here because he'll get a kick out of that one as well. But Phil Kessel of the Arizona Coyotes now, formerly of the Pittsburgh Penguins and Toronto Maple Leafs. The hot dog joke goes well with Phil Kessel, but he's still a guy who, when he wants to, he can impact a game and certainly fill the net and score some goals. So 2 years left at an $8 million cap hit for Phil Kessel, but I don't think you'll regret having him on Duckman's domination as a 12th round pick. Certainly Phil Kessel would go much higher in years past in fantasy pools, and certainly where the cap hit doesn't apply for the fantasy league. But obviously in the UFHL, we have a salary cap, and you guys are trying to meet the floor as well as stay below the ceiling. So Phil Kessel's a nice way to get to the floor, and still a fairly nice fantasy player as well. So I think Duckman's domination will be happy with that choice. And now we'll see if Hernan Salas with the following pick at 138th overall in the 12th round will follow suit and try and keep up with the salary floor.
I will not, and I will take from the Anaheim Ducks, Danton Heinen.
There you go, Danton Heinen of the Anaheim Ducks, formerly of the Boston Bruins, where he sort of emerged as a legitimate fantasy option and certainly a forward with some fantasy potential. And now in Anaheim, it looks like there's going to be room there for him in that top 6, which I think he could be kind of filling the role. He was traded for Andre Kasha, and I think he's sort of filling Kasha's role in Anaheim, a guy who can trend up and kind of grow with a young group in Anaheim. So Danton Heinen's a nice pick for Hernan. And now we're on to 139th overall in the 12th round, which puts Charisse Schultz back on the clock.
Larry, I'm going to select Antoine Roussel.
Antoine Roussel of the Vancouver Canucks. Obviously a very feisty player, a player you love to have on your team and hate to play against. That's the kind of player Antoine Roussel is. He's had a little bit of concussion issues, much like Michael Furland there in Vancouver. But I think Antoine Roussel, when he's playing, again, one of those guys, his offense is underrated, almost like a poor man's Alex Burrows. And yet the feistiness is there. He can bring penalty minutes. He likes to muck it up and play the body. So that's a nice selection for Charisse with Antoine Roussel at 139th overall, which takes us to 140th overall in the 12th round and back out to Montreal for Luc Grenier in the new MRA.
The MRA will select against from Russia, Mikhail Grigorenko.
Mikhail Grigorenko, and there's an interesting pick. I know his contract, he signed a contract with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and it was voided by the NHL, so he doesn't currently have a contract just because all contracts have been pushed back to November 1st, but he signed that contract, and he plans to play there with Columbus next season. It's just the way it is right now with COVID and everything. The July 1st deadline for free agency is pushed back to October, November. So he'll be signed with Columbus come October or November, whenever free agency starts. But right now he's without a contract. But again, you look at Mikhail Grigorenko, who is a former top 5 pick in his NHL draft year and didn't have a ton of success in the NHL. His first go-round went back to the KHL and really reestablished himself as a strong player, kind of the way Alex Radulov and others have done in the KHL. And now he's ready to come back to the NHL at 26 years old, a more mature player, and we'll see how he translates his game back across the pond to Columbus, where there's going to be opportunity for him to earn a offensive role, and certainly for the new MRA as well. So that takes us to Arlo Schultz with the 141st pick overall in the 12th round.
Troy Stetcher.
Troy Stetcher of the Vancouver Canucks, defenseman. Obviously, a guy we've got to. Arlo is also from Kelowna, so I'm sure he remembers Troy Stetcher as a Penticton in the B Hockey League, the Tier 2 Junior League. He went to the University of North Dakota and quietly carved his way out a career in the NHL with the Vancouver Canucks. And I watched Troy Stetcher, and I just can't help but think there's more fantasy upside there, more point potential. So a guy who 26 years old, right in the prime of his career, I think he could trend up and chip in more offensively for Vancouver in the years to come. At 142nd overall in the 12th round, the Bandits and John Kleinsasser are back on the clock.
Ryan Hartman.
Ryan Hartman of the Minnesota Wild, formerly of the Chicago Blackhawks and Nashville Predators. Ryan Hartman, another one of those power forward type guys. He's kind of been an agitator type player as well. He plays a gritty game, but he's a guy who can certainly score in the years to come. Another guy going into a contract year, a $1.9 million cap hit. He's going to want to, like we said for Ryan Donato and some of the other guys in Minnesota, there's a lot of bodies up front there, and they're going to have to figure out who plays where on what line. But Ryan Hartman's going to carve out a role and hopefully earn himself a nice raise while becoming a solid player for the Bandits. At 143rd overall in the 12th round, Sean Cosgrove and the Warriors are back on the clock.
Okay, the Warriors select Anton Khudobin.
Goaltender Anton Khudobin of the Dallas Stars, who is very underrated as far as goaltending goes. Everybody knows Ben Bishop there in Dallas, but Anton Khudobin has been essentially matching Ben Bishop stat line wise, and certainly has established himself as a real quality goaltender. I believe he's a UFA after this season, so it'll be interesting to see if somebody gives Anton Khudobin a shot to be a starting goaltender in the NHL, because he's always sort of been a 1B or a backup type goalie, but I think he's got that ability, and he's sort of right, 34 years old. He's right in that range where he could have a couple good years left, and when he gets a chance to be a starting goaltender, he's performed well when Ben Bishop's been hurt in Dallas. So nice selection there for Sean. And now to close out the 12th round and start the 13th round with picks 144 and 145, Jesse Gill and the Flying Pylons are back on the clock.
Well, I'll go to the dumpster fire that is the Ottawa Senators, and I'll select Chris Tierney, and that will be that pick. And then the next one, I'll go off the board, and just after picking a Senator, I have to feel better about myself and pick a Leaf. So I'll go a little off the board and hope that this KHLer turns out and pick Mikko Lehtinen.
Mikko Lehtinen, who played for Karpat, I believe, in the KHL. He's another one of those guys. He's 26 years old, so he's no longer Calder eligible, which made him eligible for the redraft. He's never been to the NHL before, but he was the KHL Defenseman of the Year, I want to say. He put up some big numbers there in Russia, well, playing in Finland, but in the Russian league. And certainly a guy who we've seen a lot of these guys come over. Some of them are huge successes, and some of them kind of flame out and don't pan out. So it'll be interesting to see which way Mikko Lehtinen goes. But there's going to be opportunity for him on Toronto's blue line if guys like Cody Ceci and Tyson Barrie and some of these free agents move along. I think Mikko Lehtinen will get a decent opportunity, decent role in Toronto. And then Chris Tierney is a guy in Ottawa who certainly they're going to need some leadership going forward. He's sort of that he can play second or third line center and really kind of help these young guys along and show them the ropes. So I think he's going to have more of a leadership role in Ottawa and still be fantasy relevant. He's only 26 years old. So you look how long Chris Tierney's been in the NHL already, and Mikko Leightonen's just coming in as technically a rookie at the same age. So two contrasting selections there, a forward and a defenseman, but two guys that should have nice roles for Jesse's fantasy team as well. Back to Sean Cosgrove and the Warriors at 146th overall in the 13th round.
All right, the Warriors go to Vegas and select Nick Cousins.
Nick Cousins, who was traded to Vegas, I believe at the deadline. He was in Montreal prior to that. He came into the league in Philadelphia, and he's sort of one of those guys who can play a third, fourth line role, but certainly has a little bit of offense to chip in and plays a physical role. He's one of those gritty guys, again, who's going to shoot the puck lots, hit lots, and sort of chip in for a number of categories for Sean Cosgrove. At 147th overall in the 13th round, John Klein are back on the clock.
Jacob Larson.
Jacob Larson, another young defenseman for the Anaheim Ducks. You got the Josh Manson, Jacob Larson pairing going now potentially, but you got two defensemen from the Anaheim Ducks. Jacob Larson was a first-round pick in his NHL draft year. He's only 23 years old, and he's one of those guys that I think as Anaheim grows as a team, there's going to be more opportunity for Jacob Larson, and perhaps we even get to see him take some spins on the power play and really see what kind of fantasy and offensive potential Jacob Larson has. But he's going to be a real solid shutdown defender, kind of like Hampus Lindholm potentially. It would be his ceiling, I would say, but certainly a guy who will be solid defensively and may have some more offense to chip in. That takes us to Arlo Schultz at 148th overall in the 13th round.
Cam Talbot.
Cam Talbot, currently of the Calgary Flames, formerly of the Edmonton Oilers, came into the league with the New York Rangers, goaltender, and it'll be interesting to see where Cam Talbot's career takes him, if he stays in Calgary or if he moves on. But certainly it'll be interesting also to see Cam Talbot. There's a lot at stake in this playoff series or play-in series between Calgary and Winnipeg. It'll be interesting to see if Cam Talbot or David Rittich gets the start and who emerges in that series for Calgary between the pipes. But Cam Talbot's only 33 years old, so he should have some good hockey left in him as well. That takes us to 149th overall in the 13th round with Luc Grenier of the new MRA.
Montreal will spend big for his second goalie with Henrik Lundqvist.
Luke grabs Henrik Lundqvist from the New York Rangers. Currently the New York Rangers. We'll see where Lundqvist's career trends, but certainly you got the tandem of Pekka Rinne and Henrik Lundqvist, and getting Henrik Lundqvist in the 13th round in a fantasy draft would have been unheard of just a few years ago, but obviously 38 years old with 1 year left at $8.5 million. Is that his last season in the NHL? Where does his career sort of trend? But Henrik Lundqvist is always a quality goaltender, and whether they go with Igor Shesterkin and Alexander Georgiev as the Russian tandem with the Rangers, or whether Lundqvist ends up being the number one guy in the playoffs, it'll be interesting to see, because we all know Hank the King Lundqvist has always performed well in the biggest situations, including the playoffs. So he's had a nice break here with COVID, and he may not be done either. And if he has a resurgence, we could be talking about a pretty big steal in the 13th round for Luke. That takes us to Sharice Schultz at 150th overall in the 13th round.
Larry, I'm going to select Sonny Milano.
Sonny Milano, now of the Anaheim Ducks, formerly of the Columbus Blue Jackets. Much like Danton Heinen, he's kind of getting a second fresh start there in Anaheim, and a potential to sort of achieve his fantasy potential, because Sonny Milano was a first-round NHL draft pick, and he's kind of a fancier forward. Like, he's got a lot of his skill set is an interesting skill set, put it that way. He likes to do some flashy moves, and we'll see. that didn't fly under John Tortorella that well, but we'll see how he fits in Anaheim with Dallas Eakins. And I do think Anaheim will try and see if they can bring that fantasy potential and offensive potential out of Sonny Milano, being he was a first-round NHL draft pick. That takes us to 151st overall in the 13th round, and Hernan Salas is on the clock.
Yeah, I'll take defenseman Radim Simic.
Radim Simic of the San Jose Sharks, who's been Brent Burns' defense partner for the most part. Very underrated Radim Simic, a guy who came over from the Czech League when he was sort of mid-20s, and what turned out to be a really good signing for San Jose, and he's carved out a nice role with the Sharks defense. He's 27 years old. They just signed him for 4 more seasons at $2.25 million, so that's a real nice cap hit for a player who is probably more serviceable than most people realize. He's not a big name, but Radim Simic is a player who can trend up for San Jose into his early 30s. That takes us to Dean Millard and Duckman's domination at 152nd overall in the 13th round.
We will take Mikael Granlund.
Mikael Granlund, currently of the Nashville Predators, formerly of the Minnesota Wild, and to be determined. He's a pending unrestricted free agent who certainly will want to have a good showing in these playoffs to show that he's still a fantasy and an offensive contributor. But I really like Mikael Granlund. I always have. He's a guy who had some really good years in Minnesota and just didn't really fit in that well in Nashville, which was surprising to me. I thought that would have been a good move for him, but he may stay in Nashville or he may find a new home again next season, and we'll see where his salary goes. He's the $5.75 million cap hit, so that could kind of potentially trend down for Dean, which would be a nice bonus, especially if he bounces back next season, because I do think at 28 years old, Mikael Granlund could have some good hockey left in him, and he certainly was a real fantasy contributor during his days in Minnesota. That takes us to the Vengeance Hockey Club and Jeff McCarthy at 153rd overall in the 13th round.
We are proud to select Optimus Rhyme, James Reimer.
James Reimer, who lives in Kelowna in the offseason. I've actually played goal at the same shinny as him a couple times in the summer when we're playing here. Was a goaltender as well. But James Reimer, a real nice guy, and obviously a good goaltender as well. He's sort of bounced around in recent years. He's in Carolina, Florida, and since leaving Toronto. But I think Carolina is a good spot for him, and I think he's going to push Peter Mrazek to be their starter in these playoffs and going forward. So James Reimer, a nice goaltending selection for Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club, which takes us back to Cameron Turner at 154th overall in the 13th round. Cameron Turner is selecting Curtis McElhinney, goaltender for the Tampa Bay Lightning, formerly of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He's the backup there in Tampa behind Andrei Vasilevsky. But Curtis McElhinney, he's 37 years old. He's kind of been a career backup, but he's always been a really good backup. And with the UFHL, you have one goalie spot per day. So you have your starting goalie and you have your backup goalie essentially. And with only one goalie starter per day. So I think Curtis McElhinney certainly is a guy that can sort of be that 1B guy for Cameron Turner going forward. Aaron Bell and Brandon are on the clock at 153rd or 155th overall in the 13th round.
I'll take the young D-man from Anaheim, Josh Mahura.
Josh Mahura, former Red Deer Rebel. He went a little later in the NHL draft just because he had injuries in his draft year, but he's a guy who actually played for the Regina Pats as well when they hosted the Memorial Cup a couple of years ago, and he's had a good run in the AHL. He's a guy that Dallas Eakins is very familiar with because Dallas Eakins coached him in San Diego with the Gulls in the AHL before getting promoted to Anaheim. So again, I think that young group from the San Diego Gulls are going to work their way up into Anaheim, knowing that Dallas Eakins is familiar with them. And Josh Mahura is a guy kind of like Brandon Montour, who was mentioned earlier. Josh Mahura is sort of the Brandon Montour heir apparent in Anaheim, I think, but a guy who can have some fantasy potential going forward as a good young defenseman. So to close out the 13th round and start the 14th round with picks 156 and 157, we're back to Jeff Brown and Brian Smith.
Brendan Dillon.
Sorry, I missed that one. Oh, Brendan Dillon. Okay, yeah. Brendan Dillon, a hard-nosed defenseman. He's in Washington right now, but did obviously most of his career was spent in San Jose, played his junior in Seattle in the Western League. Another guy who plays really physical, but can chip in a lot of categories for fantasy. And back to you guys at 157th overall.
Brett Howden.
Brett Howden of the New York Rangers, a guy who was a first-round pick for Tampa Bay. He came over in the Ryan McDonough trade to the Rangers. Brett Howden's a guy who's sort of playing in that third-line center role, and him and sort of Philip Eichel and some of these other Vitaly Kravtsovs coming up. But they have a lot of young forwards that are going to have to find a role with the Rangers, and Brett Howden being one of them. But certainly a guy who had good success in the Western League and enough to be a first-round pick, so he could have a bright upside there for Jeff and Brian. Working our way back in the 14th round at 158th overall, Aaron and Brandon are on the clock.
Just before the pick, Larry, it's Luke from MRA. If we can go faster, would be appreciated, because I'm not sure I'll be able to finish otherwise.
Yeah, no, I can speed it up. We'll trim the commentary back now. We're in the 14th round. I'll maybe make a quick comment, or otherwise we'll just keep her going.
We'll take Nikolai Prohorkin.
Nikolai Prohorkin of the Los Angeles Kings, Russian forward who came over and had quite a bit of success in his rookie season. Moving along to Cameron Turner at 159th overall in the 14th round. Cameron is taking Braden McNabb, defenseman for the Vegas Golden Knights. Obviously a good size and contributes physically, but also some offense. So Braden McNabb is off the board at 159th overall, which takes us to 160th, and Jeff McCarthy of the Vengeance Hockey Club.
Going to take one of the best first overall picks in a very long time, Eric Johnson.
Eric Johnson of the Colorado Avalanche, formerly the first overall pick for the St. Louis Blues. Another guy who's a very physical defenseman and doesn't contribute a ton of offense, but you're looking in the 14th round at 160th overall. You're pretty happy to get Eric Johnson there. He also helps you potentially cap-wise, depending if you're trying to reach the floor or where you're at there, but $6 million for the next 3 seasons. And we're on to Dean Millard at 161st overall.
All right, we will take TJ Brody.
TJ Brody of the Calgary Flames currently. We'll see what happens with his future as far as being an unrestricted free agent after this season, if he re-ups in Calgary or moves on to a new home. But obviously he's only 30 years old. He's got some good fantasy and some good NHL hockey left in him. On to you, Hernas Salas at 162.
I'll take because he has 1 year left, I'll take Paul Stastny.
Paul Stastny, a nice pick from the forward from the Vegas Golden Knights, who sort of had a bit of a resurgence, I'd say, this, and especially in the second half, he came on strong. So I think he'll be a good player for Vegas in the playoffs. On to Charisse Schulz at 163rd.
Larry, I'm going to select Luke Shen.
Luke Shen, former Kelowna Rocket, currently in Tampa Bay with the Lightning, a guy a very physical defenseman whose offense hasn't really translated from junior. He's 30 years old now. He played with Toronto and Philadelphia before ending up in Anaheim as well, I believe, before landing in Tampa Bay, but certainly a physical presence who contributes penalty units and plenty of hits. We're on to Luke Grenier and the new MRA at 164th.
MRE will select Taro Heroes of the Detroit Red Wings.
Taro Hirose of the Detroit Red Wings. Played his junior actually, I believe in the Salmon Arms Silverbacks in the BCHL, and sort of worked his way up through college to be a prominent college free agent, and Detroit jumped on him, and he's been a good fit there in Detroit. Taro Hirose. We're on to Arlo Schultz at 165th overall.
Matt Martin.
Matt Martin of the New York Islanders, formerly of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And our first true enforcer, I think, but obviously a guy who he's led the league in hits many times. So as far as hitting goes, you can't get much better than Matt Martin for his stats. Next up at 166th overall is John Kleinsasser of the Bandits.
Daniel Sprong.
Daniel Sprong of the Ducks. I believe he wound up in Washington. I know he was traded at the deadline, but Daniel Sprong, another one of those guys who's a young 23-year-old forward who came in and had a really good run with Pittsburgh as a rookie and just hasn't quite been able to stick in the league. But kind of like Sonny Milano, he has a ton of offensive upside, and he's just got to put it all together to be an NHL player, a regular top 6 NHL player. On to 167th overall with Sean Cosgrove.
I will take extended stat guy Jordan Stahl.
Jordan Stahl of the Carolina Hurricanes, obviously a pretty big name to be getting this late in the 14th round, and comes with a cap hit that always helps too, that if you're looking for the floor. But certainly Jordan Stahl is a guy that's still very serviceable and contributes quite well at 31 years old, both for fantasy, and he's certainly a big part of Carolina's team in real life. 168th overall, 169th overall to close out the 14th round and start the 15th round, Jesse Gill. Oh, Jesse, your mic might be muted.
There we go. You hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
So now that everyone doesn't know what I said, it's a Boston Bruin. I hate the Bruins, but David Krejci, can't pass him up at that spot, even though I have some cap space. And then I'll take a guy on a league minimum deal there. Pittsburgh Penguins, Teddy Bluger.
Nicely done. Like you said, it's hard to pass up David Krejci in the 14th round, and then Teddy Bluger to start the 15th round. It'll be interesting to see how Teddy Bluger's career trends, but he was a really good AHL player, and he's working his way up the ranks, and he's certainly going to have a role in Pittsburgh going forward. Back to Sean Cosgrove at 170th overall.
All right, we're going to go to Ottawa. Bit of a prospect, like his potential though. Christian Wolanin.
Christian Wolanin, a defenseman from Ottawa. He had some injuries that set him back this year, but he finished off playing in the AHL and certainly has some offensive upside as a younger defenseman. Christian Wolanin at 171st overall. That takes us to John Kleinsasser and the Bandits. Hello.
We'll take Josh Hosang.
Josh Hosang, an interesting pick, back-to-back interesting picks with Daniel Sprong and Josh Hosang, two quite similar players that just haven't been able to stick in the NHL yet, but have all the talent in the world that Sprong's 23 years old. Hosang's 24 years old. If they can figure it out, they're going to be certainly impactful in fantasy. And Josh Hosang likely will get a new home. He's been looking for one for a while to get out of Lou Lamoriello's doghouse with the Islanders. But on to 172nd, Arlo Scholes.
Drake Caggiula.
Drake Caggiula, forward for the Chicago Blackhawks, formerly of the Edmonton Oilers. Definitely fitting well. He's even played a bit with Jonathan Taves there in Chicago, and he's a gritty young guy who can score and has some offensive upside. Back to Luke Grenier at 173rd.
And Murray will select, if still available, Troy Stetcher.
Troy Stetcher is no longer available.
Okay, give me a sec.
Yeah, no worries.
Then MRA will select defenseman Patrick Nemeth.
Patrick Nemeth of the Detroit Red Wings. He is available, and he is now a member of the new MRA. Nice selection there. A big physical defenseman who skates well, too. At 174th overall, Charisse Scholes.
Larry, I'm going to pick Carl Hagelin.
Carl Hagelin of the Washington Capitals. Speedy winger who chips in a good amount of offense and still hasn't lost his wheels, which is the main thing with Carl Hagelin. He's as fast as they come. At 175th overall, Hernan Salas.
I'll take my second goalie. I'll take Mike Smith.
Mike Smith of the Edmonton Oilers, pending unrestricted free agent, but his relationship with Dave Tippett, you have to think the Oilers, he had a strong season at Edmonton. You have to think he's in the cards to potentially stick around with a very similar contract for next season. That takes us to Duckman's domination and Dean Millard at 176th overall.
We'll take Alexander Barabanov.
There we go. Alexander Barabanov, the other signing from the KHL for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Much like Mikko Lehtinen, they're both 26 years old, which makes them no longer Calder eligible. So even though they have yet to play an NHL game, they were eligible for the redraft based on their age. He's an offensive-minded forward that quite a few teams were interested in, and Toronto sort of beat out Arizona in those sweepstakes. And a Russian forward coming over could be Artemi Panarin 2.0, or could certainly not pan out. Those guys are kind of 50-50. Some pan out and some don't. On to Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club at 177th overall.
Joe Pavelski.
Joe Pavelski of the Dallas Stars. Again, surprising we're hearing Joe Pavelski in the 15th round. Certainly a guy who scores a lot of goals. He might have the best ability to deflect pucks in the National Hockey League. Nobody gets a stick on the puck like him in the slot. But he's a shooter and a scorer, so that's a nice pick in the 15th round. And we're on to Cameron Turner, who is selecting Nicholas Roy from the Vegas Golden Knights, formerly of the Carolina Hurricanes, a good young forward, up-and-comer for Vegas, who, again, he can fill a lot of different categories for a fantasy team. At 179th overall, we're on to Aaron and Brandon.
We'll finish off our D with Nick Leddy.
Of the New York Islanders, offensive-minded, puck-moving defenseman, is off to the franchise. Aaron and Brandon at 179th overall. So to end the 15th round and start the 16th round with picks 180 and 181, Jeff Brown and Brian Smith.
Aaron Dell,
Aaron Dell, goaltender with the San Jose Sharks. He's sort of picked up some of the slack there when Martin Jones struggled, but he's a pending UFA this offseason, so it'll be interesting to see where Aaron Dell winds up if he stays in San Jose or moves on. And back to you guys for pick 181.
Definitely a gamble. Ryan McDonough.
Ryan McDonough, defenseman with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Obviously came over from the New York Rangers. He was a first-round NHL draft pick back in his day and was a real strong NHL player, fantasy player, but has dipped a little bit in Tampa. But I think he's one of those guys that still skates well, and that's the main thing for Ryan McDonough. He's 31 years old, 6 years left at $6.75 million. So like you said, a bit of a gamble that he'll hold up, but I think Ryan McDonough has lots of hockey left in him at only 31. At 182nd overall, Aaron Bell and Brandon are back on the clock.
We'll take Marcus Johansson if he's available.
He is. Marcus Johansson is available. That's Marcus Johansson of the Buffalo Sabres now, formerly of the Boston Bruins, Washington Capitals. Good middle six forward who had a decent impact in his first season in Buffalo. And we're back to Cameron Turner at 183rd overall. Cameron is selecting Robert Bortuzzo, defenseman from the St. Louis Blues, a real physical, hard-nosed defenseman who, again, can impact a lot of different categories and perhaps chip in some offensively, but mainly defense first. Jeff McCarthy and the Legends Hockey Club are on the clock at 184th overall.
Jesper Boqvist.
Jesper Boqvist, the older brother of Adam Boqvist. Jesper Boqvist is a New Jersey Devils forward prospect or potential to. He was on the roster for part of this season, split between the AHL and the NHL, but certainly a guy that Lindy Ruff will probably be able to get a good amount of offense out of, which takes us to Dean Millard and Duckman's domination at 185th overall.
We'll take Mark Jankowski.
Mark Jankowski, the Calgary Flames, forward for the Flames, didn't have the best year this season, but certainly had a really good year the year before, and he's only 25 years old, former first-round pick. So another guy that you can see the upside there, whether he stays in Calgary or goes somewhere else. He is certainly an NHL player going forward. Hernan Salas at 186th overall.
I'll take defenseman from the Blue Jackets, Scott Harrington.
Scott Harrington of the Columbus Blue Jackets, defenseman, a guy who was quite good in junior and still finding his way in pro, but certainly another shutdown type, good hard-nosed defenseman, which takes us to Charisse Schultz at 187th overall.
Larry, I'm going to select Noah Gregor.
Noah Gregor of the San Jose Sharks, formerly of the WHL champion Prince Albert Raiders. Noah Gregor had a really good finish to his junior career and surprised a lot of people by getting into a good amount of games with San Jose this season. So certainly I'm a big fan of that pick, and we're on to Luke Grenier at 188th overall.
And Murray will select defenseman Noah Jolson.
Noah Jolson, defenseman of the Montreal Canadiens, played his junior in Everett with the Silvertips. Was sort of the first in that pipeline of good defensemen coming out of Everett, but he's a guy that has been up with Montreal and had some injury issues, but certainly a good young defenseman at 23 years old. On to Arlo Schultz at 189th overall.
Andrew Kopp.
Andrew Kopp of the Winnipeg Jets. Good middle six center. Probably plays mostly third line there, or plays with Adam Lowry if he's on the wing. But yeah, good utility player for the Winnipeg Jets, who certainly chips in some offense. And we're back to John Kleinsasser and the Bandits at 190th overall.
Melker Karlsson.
Melker Karlsson of the San Jose Sharks. Good solid third line forward who chips in a lot of different categories as well. Sean Cosgrove at 191st overall.
Okay, one moment. Take Oliver Kylington.
He is taken. Arlo grabbed him, I think, last round.
Oh, okay, sorry. I update my notes here.
No worries.
Kelvin DeHaan.
Calvin DeHaan of the Chicago Blackhawks, formerly of the Carolina Hurricanes, good solid defenseman, is now off to the Warriors. That means we have back-to-back picks to close out the 16th round and start the 17th round at 192 and 193. Jesse Gill, you're back on the clock.
I'm going to select from the Minnesota Wild, defenseman, a little under the radar. He's on the league minimum. Put up 10 power play points this year, Brad Hunt. And then, I can't. I don't know. Yeah, whatever. And then I'll go with Duncan Keith from Chicago. Why not?
There you go. Duncan Keith. Interesting that Brad Hunt goes right ahead of Duncan Keith in the draft. I know Duncan Keith went in the second round in his NHL draft and slid a little far there too, and then became a big steal. But certainly the cap hit as a consideration there with why Duncan Keith is going in the 17th round. Although he's only at $5.5 million for 3 more years, another guy like Ryan McDonough, Duncan Keith hasn't forgot how to skate, and he's well on the way to being a Hall of Famer, in my opinion. He's won everything he can possibly win as a hockey player. So to see Duncan Keith there, to me, that's a steal still, even at 36 years old. And Brad Hunt is a guy, like you said, who's been a bit underrated, kind of a journeyman, but certainly chipped in Minnesota this year. Sean Cosgrove is back on the clock at 194th.
All right, I think this guy's still here from Minnesota, Zach Parise.
Zach Parise is still there. He is now a member of the Warriors. Another guy who surprisingly is still available in the 17th round, but certainly when cap hits are a consideration, he's at $7.5 million, and everybody's trying to fit themselves in between the ceiling and the floor. So Zach Parise is finally off the board at 194th overall, which takes us to John Kleinsaucer and the Bandits at 195th.
I'll take Adam Larson.
Adam Larson from the Adam Larson from the Edmonton Oilers, defenseman who's got 1 year remaining on his contract. There's some talk Seattle could have interest in him potentially in the expansion draft, or he may certainly him and Oscar Klefbom have been a great all-Swedish pairing for the Oilers. So Edmonton would probably like to keep Adam Larson if it works with their cap picture, but if not, there'll be some interest in him. He's only 27 years old and was a former top 5 pick in the same year that Ryan Nugent-Hopkins went first overall. At 196th overall, we have Arlo Scholes back on the clock.
Austin Wagner.
Austin Wagner of the Los Angeles Kings, young forward or just entering sort of the primary of his career. He's a real speedster. If you don't know Austin Wagner, that's his calling card. He's a real fast forward who had good success in the Western Hockey League with the Regina Pats. Up next at 197th overall, Luc Grenier.
At this point, Montreal will select Steven Santini.
Steven Santini, who is a younger defenseman, real gritty guy. He was in New Jersey's system. That's who drafted him and brought him into the league. He was traded to Nashville as part of the PK Subban trade. So kind of a interesting little quirk there. Luke drafted PK Subban earlier, and now he gets Steven Santini, one of the guys that was sent the other way. At 198th overall, Charisse Scholes.
Zach Aston Reese.
Zach Aston Reese, young forward from the Pittsburgh Penguins, sort of a power forward type, gets lots of shots, lots of hits, and can certainly score. At 199th, we're at Hernan Salas.
I'll take young defenseman from the Sens, Max Lajoie.
Max Lajoie, who had a good run with the Sens a couple years ago and then spent a lot of this season in the AHL. Former Swift current Bronco, we can give that shout out. Max Lajoie, so he's off in Ottawa, and he's off to Hernan Salas' team at 199th overall. At 200th overall, we're back to Dean Millard and Duckman's domination.
We will take Brandon Peary.
Brandon Peary of the Vegas Golden Knights, and to be determined going forward, but certainly a guy who seems like whenever he gets a chance to play in the NHL, he scores goals, but for some reason he doesn't stick in the lineup. So interesting player, and certainly a guy, or I guess he's got 1 year left on this contract with Vegas at a nice cheap $775,000. So hopefully he can work his way into that, being a regular in Vegas and contribute on a regular basis. On to Vengeance Hockey Club and Jeff McCarthy at 201st overall.
Libor Hayek.
Libor Hayek of the New York Rangers. He was another young defenseman who came over with Brett Howden as part of that trade for Ryan McDonough. He was originally a Tampa Bay Lightning prospect, Libor Hayek. He was actually, funny story, he was traded straight up the draft spot where Tampa took Libor Hayek. They traded Anthony DeAngelo straight up to draft Libor Hayek, who played for the Saskatoon Blades in the Western Hockey League, and now on to the New York Rangers. At 202 overall is Cameron Turner. He's going to take Chandler Stevenson of the Vegas Golden Knights, formerly of the Washington Capitals, who has sort of had a nice resurgence there in Vegas and a good fit for the Vegas Golden Knights. Chandler Stevenson. At 203rd is Aaron and Brandon.
We'll take Henrik Borgstrom.
Henrik Bjorkstrom, Florida Panthers first-round pick who spent much of this season in the AHL. Some trade rumors surrounding him as to whether or not he's going to continue to be a Florida Panther, but certainly a guy who has a ton of offensive upside and should be a good fantasy player in the years to come. He's only 22 years old, kind of like Casey Middlestad, that type of player who went a few rounds earlier. At 204th and 205th overall, to close out the 17th round and start the 18th round are Jeff Brown and Brian Smith.
Jamie Oleksiak.
Jamie Oleksiak of the Dallas Stars, big, strong defenseman. Sister's the swimmer for Canada. She might be more famous than Jamie. She won a lot of medals at the last Olympics, but Jamie Oleksiak was a first-round pick, and like I said, big physical defenseman who impacts a lot of categories. Back to you guys at 205th overall.
Tyler Pitlick.
Tyler Pitlick, forward for the Philadelphia Flyers. Bounced around the league a little bit, and he'd always had a bit of trouble with injuries, but when he's healthy, he's shooting lots, and he can certainly score. At 206th overall, back to Aaron and Brandon.
We'll take Matthew Joseph.
Matthew Joseph, forward for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Another young guy who he had a real good year 2 seasons ago and then kind of developed a bit more in the AHL this season, but only 23 years old and sort of a two-way forward with a good energy and good physicality. On to Cameron Turner at 207th overall. Cameron is selecting from the St. Louis Blues, Mackenzie McEachran, who's kind of like Zach Sanford, another big-bodied guy who's going to be in the good books with Craig Berube. It's his kind of hockey player. Jeff McCarthy at 208th overall for the Vengeance Hockey Club.
Brock McGinn.
Brock McGinn from the Carolina Hurricanes, a good two-way forward as well, who can play sort of a middle six role. Dean Millard at 209th overall.
I will take Charles Houdon.
Charles Houdon of the Montreal Canadiens, who's had some time in the AHL, but actually looked quite good when he was up in the NHL this season. Charles Houdon goes to Duckman's domination. 210th overall is Hernan Salas.
I'll take from the Carolina Hurricanes, Jordan Martinook.
Jordan Martinook from the Carolina Hurricanes is off the board. A forward, plays again kind of that gritty style on the third line kind of player, but definitely where we are in the draft, Jordan Martinook's a good grab there. So we're on to Charisse Schultz at 211th overall.
Larry, I'm going to take Jordan Osterley.
Jordan Osterley of the Arizona Coyotes, defenseman. Another guy who kind of had a down year this year, but has shown a good offensive potential from the back end. Luc Grenier at 212th overall.
You still online, Luke?
Oh, or Luke, do you have your mic maybe muted?
He did send a message that he's got to leave shortly.
Yeah, I just see that now. Where's Luke at for cap space so we can see her? Nathan, if you want to.
He's only got 2 million left, so he can only pick 2 more players.
Okay.
Can't get 3.
Right.
He needs forwards.
Let's see.
Thomas Nosek.
Sure, Thomas Nosek. That works. Thomas Nosek of the Vegas Golden Knights is off to Luc Grenier. That takes us to 213th overall with Arlo Schultz.
Jimmy Vesey.
Jimmy Vesey, currently of the Buffalo Sabres, pending UFA, former big-name college free agent. We'll see where his career trends from here. 214th overall is John Kleinsasser and the Bandits.
Connor Carrick.
Connor Carrick, defenseman for the New Jersey Devils, formerly of the Toronto Maple Leafs. A good guy off the ice and seems to be a guy who can still carve out a decent career. He's only 26 years old. 215th overall, Sean Cosgrove.
Okay, one moment. Michael Stone.
Michael Stone, defenseman for the Calgary Flames, is off the board to Warriors and Sean Cosgrove. On to Jesse Gill to close out the 18th round and start the 19th round at picks 216, 217.
Oh. I'm out of D spots, so I'm going to look at the forwards here.
I was wondering how many more D you can load up on. You got 8 already?
Yeah, I got a few. I'll draft from Los Angeles, Michael Amadio. I don't.
Yeah, you got it. Amadeo, yeah.
Yeah, and then I'll go with a goalie, and I'll draft Phoenix Copley. I'll pick, I guess.
Phoenix Copley of the Washington Capitals.
Yeah, see if Holtby moves on and they go with them.
Yeah, could have Samsonov Copley tandem there. Yeah, that's for sure. So you got Michael Amadio and Phoenix Copley, and we're on to 218th overall with Sean Cosgrove.
I would go with Sebastian Aho, defenseman.
Sebastian Aho, not to be mistaken with the Carolina Hurricanes top line center Sebastian Aho. This is a defenseman from the New York Islanders. He's actually from Sweden, whereas the other Sebastian Aho is from Finland, but they spell their names exactly the same way. But this is Sebastian Aho, the defenseman from the New York Islanders. At 219th overall, John Kleinsasser of the Bandits.
Are you still online, John? Might be muted, John, if you're talking.
Yeah, we don't have a mic for John right now, I don't think.
So we'll auto pick his player, Larry?
Yeah, we can. Yeah. Where are we here? What does he need, or where?
Forwards.
Is he close to the cap, or has he got?
He's got lots of room. So Derek Stepan.
Yeah, that's a good pick.
Can't complain. Sorry, Bobby Ryan.
Bobby Ryan.
One. Do we want?
What about Kyle Turris?
Yeah, actually, Kyle Turris. Give him Kyle Turris. Yeah, that's probably the best player among them. Maybe. Sure, do that.
Okay.
Kyle Turris to the Bandits. And we are on to Arlo Scholes at 220th overall.
John Moore.
John Moore, defenseman from the Boston Bruins. John Moore is off the board to Arlo at 220th overall. I don't know, Luke, are you back or are we picking for Luke? I think this is Luke's last pick, cap hit wise.
Why is my screen showing?
So we're looking for a forward, I believe, Nathan.
Yep, he needs a forward.
We can give him. He's been going young. We can give him. Who do we want to give Luke?
Well, that's what's on YouTube now.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, maybe give him Michael McCarron, former Montreal first rounder. He might like that. Goes good with his roster, with his team name. So Luke Grenier gets Michael McCarron, and at 222nd, Charisse Scholes.
Larry, did you get that pick?
No, I didn't hear it.
It's for Austin Czarnik, Larry.
Austin Czarnik?
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Of the Calgary Flames, formerly of the Boston Bruins, Austin Czarnik. And we're on to Hernan Salas at 223rd.
I'll take Michael McLeod.
Michael McLeod of the New Jersey Devils, another first-round NHL draft pick, older brother of Ryan McLeod, Oilers forward prospect. But Michael McLeod has gone at 223rd, and we're on to Dean Millard at 224th.
Take Derek Pouliot.
Derek Pouliot, now of the St. Louis Blues, formerly of the Vancouver Canucks. Derek Pouliot of the Portland Winterhawks in junior, where he was a dominant junior player and was, I believe, a first-round pick for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and now trying to work his way back up the ranks and stay in the NHL. Jeff McCarthy at 225th overall for the Vengeance Hockey Club.
Jan Ruda.
Jan Ruda, currently of the Tampa Bay Lightning, pending unrestricted free agent defenseman, guy who could certainly stick around in the league for a number of seasons to come. We're up to Cameron Turner at 226th overall. Cameron Turner is taking Martin Marincin of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Defenseman for the Toronto Maple Leafs / Toronto Marlies. But I think, again, he's one of those guys who's probably going to have a spot on the Leafs potentially next season, competing with guys like Mikko Lehtinen as some of these free agents move on. But Martin Marincin is now on Cameron Turner's roster, which takes us to 227th, and Aaron and Brandon.
I feel like we need a little bit of truculence. We're going to take Zach McEwen.
Zach McEwen of the – oh, I don't think McEwen's played enough games. I don't think he's eligible for the redraft.
Wasn't he on the list?
He might have been on the original list, but I think I updated – let me double check. But if he hasn't played 26 games – yeah, I think I sent out the original list and then I updated it. But I'll double check here, but I don't think he's played enough games.
Okay.
We've already made.
Yeah, he's at 21. Yeah, 21 games he needs to get. He was 5 short of being eligible.
That's too bad. We'll take Vladislav Kamenev.
Vladislav Kamenev of the, I believe, the Nashville Predators now, but no, Colorado Avalanche. There you go. You almost stumped me. But Vladislav Kamenev of the Colorado Avalanche, he was part of that trade with Samuel Girard when Matt Duchene went to Nashville. Nonetheless, we're on to 228 and 229 to close out round 19 and start round 20. Jeff Brown and Brian Smith.
Luca Spiza.
Luca Spiza, a defenseman for the New York Islanders at 228, and back to you at 229.
Adam Lowry.
Adam Lowry of the Winnipeg Jets, another former Swift Current Bronco who won the 4 Broncos award as the WHL MVP in his junior career in Swift Current, and has been a real good NHL player for the Winnipeg Jets. So Adam Lowry is now a member of Jeff Brown and Brian Smith's franchise at 229th, which takes us back to Aaron and Brandon again at 230th as we work our way back in the 20th round.
Corey Perry.
Corey Perry of the Dallas Stars. There's a big name going in the later rounds at 230th overall. Obviously, cap considerations and all the rest, but Corey Perry, I think he can still be an impact player in fantasy, both scoring and as well as chipping in some penalty minutes. Oh, sorry, Cameron Turner has selected Nick Dowd. So after Cameron Turner, we have Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club at 232nd.
We'll take Chris Wagner.
Chris Wagner of the Boston Bruins, gritty third, fourth line center. And we're on to Dean Millard of Duckman's Domination at 233rd.
Take Ryan Miller.
Ryan Miller, goaltender of the Anaheim Ducks. Dean gets his backup for Duckman's Domination, so convenient that he gets a Duck there with Ryan Miller. 234th overall is Hernan Salas.
Yeah, let's go with Thomas Nosek from the Golden Knights.
He has been selected. We selected him. He was one of those auto picks or one of the ones for some. I believe Luke got him in the last round.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry about that.
No worries.
I'll take Derek Stepan then.
Derek Stepan, there you go. Another guy who's a good NHL player and has been for a lot of years, but maybe slipped in this draft just because of cap considerations. Nevertheless, Derek Stepan to Hernan Salas, and we're up to 235th overall with Charisse Scholes.
Larry, I'm going to take goalie Brian Elliott.
Brian Elliott of the Philadelphia Flyers, goaltender, is now with Charisse Scholes, formerly of the Calgary Flames. Charisse Scholes has selected Brian Elliott at 235th overall, which takes us back to Luc Grenier, which I believe is now a pass. Nathan will let us know about his salary cap situation.
Yeah, you're right, Larry. He's only has 300,000 left, so we'll skip that pick.
Okay, and yeah, feel free to interject, Nathan, if other teams are also at their cap now that we're in the final 3 rounds. So if somebody else has reached the cap, we'll stop them.
Yeah, we'll notify you guys as soon as we come across.
Okay, no, that sounds good. So Luc Grenier is a pass, which means we're at Arlo Scholes, 237th overall.
Laurent Brossois.
Laurent Brossois, goaltender for the Winnipeg Jets, is off the board at 237th overall to Arlo Scholes. At 238th is John Kleinsasser and the Bandits, which I believe John may not be here anymore.
Yeah, we're good. Ian McCoshen.
Oh, there we go. Ian McCoshen, defenseman, formerly of the Florida Panthers. I believe he's in Colorado now, but I could be wrong on where Ian McCoshen. I know he was traded or moved on from Florida, but Ian McCoshen, another young, sort of just 24-year-old defenseman who's trying to find his way and stay in the NHL full time. Sean Cosgrove at 239th overall for the Warriors.
All right, Dylan Sakura.
Dylan Sakura from the Chicago Blackhawks, young forward prospect, had a good college career and trying to carve out a role in the NHL. So with that, we're at picks 240 and 241 to close out the 20th round and start the final 3 rounds. At round 21, we're back to Jesse Gill.
Okay, well, I'm stuck to drafting forwards, so I'll take I'll pick another potential Leaf next year, Jason Spezza. Maybe he signs for league minimum with the Leafs again. And then I'll take a former Leaf in Carl Grundstrom.
There you go. Carl Grundstrom, now of the Los Angeles Kings, another good gritty forward who can chip in some offense and has some decent upside for sure. So that's a nice pick. And Jason Spezza has had a real good career and trying to stick around in the league under maybe didn't fit as well with Mike Babcock there in Toronto, but he's doing a little better under Sheldon Keefe and might be able to stick around one more year or so in Toronto. So back to Sean Cosgrove at 242nd overall.
Okay, trying to stay under the cap here. We're going to go with from the Sharks, Antti Suomela.
There you go. Antti Suomela, forward from the San Jose Sharks. Kind of was back and forth between the Sharks and the Barracuda this season, but another one of those guys who signed from Europe and He's 26 years old now, but certainly a serviceable NHLer. Back to John Kleinsasser and the Bandits at 243rd overall.
Nokum Nygaard.
Joakim Nygard from the Edmonton Oilers. Forward from the Edmonton Oilers, Joakim Nygard, who was a high-scoring forward in in Sweden, and came over this season. A guy who speed is his calling card. He can really fly out there. He can almost keep up with Connor McDavid. They just need him to finish some more of those chances and put some pucks in the net. But Arlo Scholes is up at 244th.
Adam Ernie.
Adam Ernie of the Detroit Red Wings, formerly of the Tampa Bay Lightning. Forward Adam Ernie, a first-round pick for Tampa back in the day, who's now reunited with Steve Yzerman in Detroit. Next up is Luke Grenier, which is a pass. So that takes us back to Charisse Scholes at 246th overall.
I'm going to take Mason Appleton.
Mason Appleton, forward for the Winnipeg Jets. Another younger guy who's trying to force his way into a regular role in the league, which takes us back to Hernan Salas at 247th overall.
Yeah. I'll take defenseman Tim Heed.
Tim Heed of the San Jose Sharks. Defenseman Tim Heed, an offensive-minded guy who hasn't quite had the fantasy production yet, but he certainly could emerge as a fantasy asset going forward, which takes us to Dean Millard and Duckman's domination at 248th overall.
We'll take Valentin Zykov.
Valentin Zykov of the Vegas Golden Knights. He had the positive test for steroids this season, so he missed some time. But right before that, he was coming into his own and looked like he was going to be a player for Vegas, and certainly a guy who can score, and showed that when he was in Carolina's system as well. So Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club are on the clock at 249th overall.
We're going to take Jansen Harkins.
Jansen Harkins, forward for the Winnipeg Jets, formerly of the Prince George Cougars in the Western Hockey League. A real good, young, gritty kid who I think is going to fit in well there with people like Adam Lowry. 250th overall is Cameron Turner. Just waiting for Cameron's selection here in the telegram. Cameron Turner is selecting Richard Panik of the Washington Capitals. Forward who certainly came up through the Leafs and Tampa Bay and sort of bounced around a bit, but a guy who can score some goals for the Washington Capitals going forward. Richard Panik to Cameron Turner, which takes us to 251st overall is Aaron and Brandon.
We were taking Richard Panik. We're going to take a huge gamble here. We're going to take Nikita Triamkin.
Nikita Triamkin of the Vancouver Canucks. They're still waiting for him to sign a contract, but all indications are he wants to come back to North America, and he will be on an NHL contract next season. The Canucks have his rights, and he has played enough games in previous seasons to be eligible for the UFHL redraft. So Nikita Triamkin, the big Russian blue liner, is off to Aaron and Brandon. So to close out the 21st round and start the 22nd round with back-to-back picks at 252 and 253 are Jeff Brown and Brian Smith.
Carson Kuhlman.
Carson Kuhlman, forward for the Boston Bruins, who had a good little impact in their playoffs last season when he got put in the lineup, and see how he does this play-in round, or this, I guess they're advanced to the first round already. Boston's one of the buys. But back to you at 253, Carson Kuhlman is off the board.
Dennis Malgin.
Dennis Malgin, Russian forward from the Toronto Maple Leafs, formerly of the Florida Panthers, is off the board to Jeff and Brian at 253 overall. On to Aaron Bell at 254.
Was Chandler Stevenson taken?
Chandler Stevenson was taken, yes, a couple of rounds ago.
Sorry about that.
No worries. He went 202 to Cameron Turner. He was one of the Telegram picks.
We'll take Matt Luff.
Matt Luff, forward from the Los Angeles Kings, is off the board on his way to Aaron and Brandon's franchise, which takes us back to Cameron Turner at 255th overall.
I think he's picked Gunnarsson.
Oh, sorry. There we go. Cameron Turner has taken Carl Gunnarsson at 255th overall. Sorry, guys. I was trying to get the live stream going again. It seems to have crapped out. But nonetheless, we might have to finish the last two rounds without the YouTube people, unfortunately. I'll keep working at that. But we're back to Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club at 256th overall.
We're taking Josh Brown.
Josh Brown, defenseman for the Florida Panthers, has been selected. 256th overall for Jeff McCarthy, which takes us back to Dean Millard at 257.
We'll take Dryden Hunt.
Dryden Hunt, forward from the Florida Panthers, back-to-back Florida Panthers picks. Dryden Hunt was a Moose Jaw Warrior, one of the top-scoring WHL forwards just a few seasons ago, to Hernan Salas at 258th overall.
I'll take Gaetan Haas from the Edmonton Oilers.
Gaetan Haas, the German forward Swiss forward, from the Edmonton Oilers, is off to Hernan Salas at 258th overall. I believe Gaetan Haas has re-signed for next season already, so he'll be back in Edmonton or competing for a spot in Edmonton, which takes us to Charisse Schulz at 259th overall.
Michael Raffle.
Michael Raffle, forward from the Philadelphia Flyers, has been selected. Big power forward type guy who's chipped in quite a bit of offense throughout his career. Luke Grenier passes, which means we're on to Arlo Schulz at 261st overall.
Nicholas Patan.
Nicholas Patan currently of the Toronto Maple Leafs, formerly of the Winnipeg Jets. We'll see if he stays in Toronto, but certainly a guy who had a lot of success in the Western Hockey League with the Portland Winterhawks. At 262nd overall is John Kleinsasser and the Bandits.
Calvin Pickard. Pickard.
Yeah, there you go. Calvin Pickard, goaltender from the Detroit Red Wings, formerly of the Colorado Avalanche, has been selected by the Bandits, which takes us back to Sean Cosgrove and the Warriors at 263rd overall.
For the Bruins, Brett Ritchie.
Brett Ritchie is selected I believe he's with the Boston Bruins, Brett Ritchie. I know Nick Ritchie's with the Boston Bruins now, but I believe Brett Ritchie's still there as well. He was sort of back and forth between the NHL and the AHL this season, but Brett Ritchie is off the board and on his way to the Warriors at 263rd overall. We are now down to the final pick of the 22nd round, And the first pick of the final round and the 23rd round at 264 and 265, this will be Jesse Gill's final selection at 265. So, Jesse, you got 2 picks to close it out for yourself.
Oh, I have one more. Isn't there a 23rd round?
You're picking the
Or is
last
this-
pick.
oh,
Of
this
your,
is the last
you're
two
back to
picks.
back.
Oh,
So your last pick of
I
the 22nd and first pick of the 23rd.
Which is weird because I have 3 forward spots. Oh, that's why. Because you can only pick so many defensemen, so many forwards. Okay.
Right.
Okay, so I will pick Philip Schlappick from Ottawa. And then I'll go with Travis Boyd from the Washington Capitals.
There you go. So 2 picks to close it out for Jesse Gill, and the Flying Pylons were Philip Schlappick of the Ottawa Senators and Travis Boyd from the Washington Capitals, which means Sean Cosgrove, you're up with your final selection at 266th overall.
All right, with the final selection, we're going to hope for a rebound from Jimmy Vesey.
He has been selected. I believe Arlo took him
Okay.
round ago, 2 rounds ago.
What about Derek Ryan?
Derek Ryan is available. You can take Derek Ryan, former Carolina Hurricane, current Calgary Flame, is off the board and on his way to the Warriors at 266th overall. That means we're up to 267th overall, and John Kleinsaucer of the Bandits will be making their final selection.
Jeff Carter.
Jeff Carter of the Los Angeles Kings is in the final round of the UFHL redraft. Obviously has a bit of a big cap hit, but Jeff Carter is actually not that bad. $5.27 million for 2 more seasons. Jeff Carter, good of John to have that much cap space left to be able to grab a potential impact player like Jeff Carter as maybe the most well-known selection of the final round. But we're up to 268th overall with Arlo Scholes.
Oscar Fantenberg.
Oscar Fantenberg, defenseman from the Vancouver Canucks, is Arlo's final selection. A Swedish guy who's obviously been working his way into the NHL. He played in Calgary a bit, Los Angeles a bit, and now in Vancouver, and he's a pending UFA, but a defenseman who impressed me in some of my viewings this season. So on to Charisse Scholes with her final selection at 270th overall.
I'm going to take Noah Juleson.
Noah Juleson has been selected. I believe Luke took him a few rounds ago.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah, no rush.
What about Frederick Clayson?
Frederick Clayson is available. Defenseman for I believe the New Jersey Devils or possibly the Carolina Hurricanes is where he finished the season. Frederick Clayson, formerly of the Ottawa Senators. I want to say he's in Carolina now, so hopefully I didn't get stumped there. But Frederick Clayson to Charisse Scholes with her final selection at 270th, which means we're up to Hernan Salas for his final selection at 271st.
Yeah, apologies if he's been taken, but I'm going to take, if he's available, Rasmus Asplund.
Rasmus Asplund is available. Center from the Buffalo Sabres. Forward for Buffalo Sabres was a second-round pick a couple years back. Good young up-and-coming forward for Buffalo. Rasmus Asplund to Hernan Salas at 271st overall, which means Dean Millard and Duckman's Domination will make their final selection at 272nd.
Our capologist, my wife Trish, made this pick. We're taking Luke Witkowski.
Luke Witkowski, physical defenseman who can play. He's actually a swingman. He plays some forward and some defense, but he's mainly a defenseman for the Tampa Bay Lightning, formerly of Detroit, but ended up in Tampa. Real physical guy who can bring some penalty minutes and lots of hits. So that means Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club will close out their draft at 273rd overall.
We are very pleased to select and finish the draft with Mitch Stevens.
Mitch Stevens of the Tampa Bay Lightning, a forward for Tampa. A really, again, kind of that third line forward right now, but could work his way up the lineup. An impressive guy in junior, and I believe he was a first-round pick in his draft year, so that could be a potential steal looking back on the final round of the UFHL redraft for Jeff McCarthy and the Vengeance Hockey Club at 273rd overall. That takes us to Cameron Turner for Cameron's final pick at 274th overall. Cameron has selected Thomas Yurko of the Edmonton Oilers, currently of the Edmonton Oilers. I believe he's a pending UFA after this season. He had some injuries, but he looked good in training camp and early on in the season, formerly of the Detroit Red Wings. Thomas Yurko, Edmonton Oilers, has been selected at 274th, which means at 275th with the second to last pick of the UFHL redraft, Aaron and Brandon.
It's gross, but we'll finish our draft here with Brad Richardson.
Brad Richardson, forward from the Arizona Coyotes, former Vancouver Canuck, is off the board at 275th overall to Aaron and Brandon, Brad Richardson, which means last but not least, closing out the UFHL redraft at 276th overall with the final selection is Jeff Brown and Brian Smith.
Thanks for a great job, Larry.
Ilya Lyubushkin.
Ilya Lyubushkin, back-to-back Arizona Coyotes to close out the draft. Ilya Lyubushkin, defenseman from the Arizona Coyotes, is the 276th and final selection of the UFHL redraft. Want to thank all 12 owners for their participation, the majority of which stuck with us for the full, I guess, almost 3 and a bit hours. So almost 3.5 hours. So great participation by all. Thanks to everybody for picking in such a timely fashion and keeping track of your lists, and all the best to you going forward with your rosters from the UFHL redraft.
Thanks, Larry.
Thanks for hosting.
Good luck, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Larry.
you,
Thanks,
you
all.
too.
Thanks, guys.
Can't wait to win this year.
Good job, everyone. Good job. That
Thanks,
was
everyone.
amazing.
Good to meet y'all.
Thank you,
nice
Larry.
to meet everybody for sure.
You're amazing.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay,
all.
bye.
Yeah, have a good one. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.